Hello everyone, welcome back into another episode of Last Protagonist reacting to a bunch of random videos. I hope you're doing well. Zionis, thanks for continuing your Great Lore Hunter membership for 43 months, bro. Man, is my channel even that old? That's crazy. Seriously, I appreciate that. So, Iman, Asnex, Weddy, Zionis, welcome back in. So, yesterday on the stream, we just checked out two videos, but they were both pretty good. The first of those was Storm King's The Night of Black Knives, The Double Betrayal. Then the second was Sinclair Lore's reaction to Shadow of the Urgy and a review and a discussion with St. Trina, which was fun. So today I have a couple different ones queued up with Soulslike versus Pure Action and The Parry Problem by MildConviction. We watched something else by them. I think it was about games like abandonware should be in the public domain. And that was a pretty cool video. So I've been seeing stuff on their feed come up, or stuff come up on my feed from them, which is why we've got this one queued up. Then we have another one from Honored Man. It had been a minute with Cursed Divinity and Elden Ring lore. Then we have Erebon's Sellen the Astrologer, History, Fate, and the Mystery in Between, Elden Ring lore / video essay. And to finish things up, we have Zaminical, I don't know. FromSoftware fans lost the plot, which it could go either way. It could be epic, it could be horrible, it could be somewhere in between. So we're going to have to see how that one goes. Without Horns, Elden Enthusiast, Platinum Chip, Halo the Sun, welcome back in. You got a paper deadline? Oh, yep. I feel that as well. Like, the more deadlines I have, the more I can tune in and focus. Going to be up all night. My condolences. Boy, what are you doing? Here. I always got to be causing problems. Here. Come on. Alright. Now, hopefully, he's dealt with. He had been settled a moment ago, and then he's being a jerk. Okay. Here's a lore question. What the heck is the Iron Hotblade in Stormbale? I don't know if this is like a meme reference to something. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Scalise said, FromSoft fans have lost the plot. We never found it. DMH. DMH. That's funny. All right. So let's check out Soulslikes versus Pure Action and the Parry Problem. So I've got some preliminary thoughts. I'm curious about how they're going to set up this video. And when did this come out? A month ago. So I've never played Neo 2 to know how that works. And apparently Stellar Blade may have also had parrying as well. And I also haven't played Wukong yet. So I wonder how much these things are going to inform the genre. I did like the parrying function in Lords of the Fallen and their stance system, but yeah. Scalise said Kazan's pretty similar to Neo 2. Yeah, Iman says Neo is terrible. I tried it. I think I could give it a better shot if I could change the control schemes a bit more, but the fact that I can't get it to be more similar to a FromSoft game makes it a little bit more, has a higher barrier to entry than I'd like. So anyway, let's go ahead and dive on in.
On January 23rd, Microsoft, Koei Tecmo, and Team Ninja shadow dropped Ninja Gaiden 2 Black.
All right, so YouTube is being a jerk again. Let me take off auto for one, and then I might have to do the secret trick.
A visual remake.
Yeah, it looks like I'm gonna have to do the secret trick. Okay. So for anybody who ever, for some reason, has the issues that I have, what you need to do is go to your YouTube settings off of the main page thing, the tab that'll appear on the left. Just scroll down to settings. Then you have to go to playback and performance, and then switch the AV1 settings around, and then for whatever reason that fixes
remake
things.
of Ninja Gaiden 2 that combined elements of both the vanilla release of the game, which launched in 2008 on the Xbox 360, and the Sigma version, which released on the PlayStation 3 a year later. The differences between...
So I got distracted. I'm going to just back up to the beginning.
On January 23rd, Microsoft, Koei Tecmo, and Team Ninja shadow-dropped Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, a visual remake of Ninja Gaiden 2 that combined elements of both the vanilla release of the game, which launched in 2008 on the Xbox 360, and the Sigma version, which released on the PlayStation 3 a year later. The differences between the versions is a whole separate...
This looks really rough, like all the smoke and stuff.
Can of worms that I'm not going to get into in this video, because it's not the subject here. The subject is the simple fact that, even in spite of its clear changes and removal of some content, Ninja Gaiden 2 Black is still a very slick, fun, and gratifying game to play at a basic, foundational level.
I might need to turn down the volume for you guys slightly. Okay. I never really played the Ninja Gaiden games beyond the ones that came out on the regular Nintendo, and they always had kind of a notorious reputation for being really difficult, and so that kind of turned me off from like wanting to give them a shot. But thinking about it now, I heard the same thing about Demon's Souls and Dark Souls, and I ended up enjoying those games. So I wonder if I would have enjoyed like the more modernized Ninja Gaiden back in the day.
Played the vanilla game back for the Xbox 360 way back in the day and loved it then, but this visually upgraded re-release on Unreal Engine 5...
Oh, Weddy, you were asking about the wet blade? It was, oh, you found it, never mind. Okay, I was gonna say where it was. Man, thanks for continuing your Lore Hunter membership for 10 months. Appreciate that, man. Let me back this up. Okay.
Loved it then, but this visually upgraded re-release on Unreal Engine 5 just proves that its controls and overall gameplay loop hasn't aged a day. Just the simple act of controlling Ryu Hayabusa and slicing down enemies that turn into gore fountains is amazing. The moves you can pull off and the way he's animated just makes you feel like a badass, even if you're not being completely efficient. I'm not the only one who feels this way either. When 2 Black released and new and old fans alike played the game, social media was pretty quickly flooded with one simple question: why aren't there more games like Ninja Gaiden? Or
I honestly never heard a damn thing about this, so it's kind of funny to me for them to say that social media was flooded. So maybe this is a me problem and having my algorithm not touch on this. I don't know. But yeah, I'm completely at a loss as to what to expect here. And the visual clarity of their footage is not the best. I wonder if this is like some HDR stuff, which makes it look extra desaturated, or just low bit rates or something like that. Because I was like, man, I can't even see the main character. And this might be one of those games where it feels a lot better to play than it does to watch. Halo says Ninja Gaiden is harder than any Souls game. It might be harder than Sekiro, depending on difficulty. Okay. So then I guess its reputation was warranted. The internet was shook. Source, trust you, bro. Okay. Meji Linky, welcome into the stream.
Or other pure action
But please stop spamming.
games like Devil May Cry, also called character action games. And why has every developer or publisher instead decided to make or fund Souls-likes the last several years? It's a pretty valid question to ask, and even though I do love Souls-likes, I find myself asking it too. Action games like Ninja Gaiden, Devil May Cry, God Hand, etc. have been around for way longer, and we still do get some great games occasionally like Hi-Fi Rush, and there seems to be a bit of a movement of big action games coming from China as well as some promising indie games. So,
Lost Soul aside,
of big action games coming from China.
Tides of Annihilation. Is that the new one that got announced recently? I guess one problem that I'm seeming to have with some of these like Chinese games is that they all look very similar and they don't stand out, which isn't to say that they don't look good or anything. Like, I think a couple of the trailers that I've seen have actually looked really cool, and I've always just been kind of waiting to see more gameplay wise and stuff before investing myself into them. Because this reminds me, maybe this is the game that I'm thinking of. Anyway.
As well as some
Why does that look like Melina? Because it's a girl with wall eyes and black hair. She does kind of look like Melina, though.
promising indie games.
And also, welcome back in Galaxy Dragon.
So maybe we won't be having this whole conversation for much longer anyway. But as of right this very moment, there is a distinct lack of games trying to capitalize on the ideas presented from the pure action games back from the mid-2000s to mid-2010s. At one point around 2005 or so, they were pretty popular, because that's when Ninja Gaiden Black, Devil May Cry 3, and God of War all released in close proximity. But even after that, this particular type of action game was still confined to a few key studios who contributed the most to it, such as Capcom, Team Ninja, and especially Platinum Games. Even though most of these games were fairly successful and had very loyal fans who would play anything remotely similar, the genre never truly blew up and sparked a huge trend that a ton of other studios followed. But after FromSoftware came along and released 4 successful games across 6 years with Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 2, and Bloodborne, suddenly everyone wanted a piece. In fact, some of the early imitators even started development before Dark Souls 2 even came out. And now, in 2025, Soulslike is its own subgenre, and it's already pretty stuffed. What's disappointing, though, is that in spite of how many Soulslikes there are now, very few of them actually reach the level of quality put out by FromSoftware. So many developers in the last 10 years tried or are trying to make their own Souls-likes, yet hardly any are even as good as Demon's Souls, the first real Souls game. If anything, that should be a sign to try something else, so why not a pure action game without all those RPG elements to worry about? It's not.
Yeah, I was thinking about how Ninja Gaiden, it did have a bit of a reputation, but how it kind of slipped under the radar. And now I'm wondering why it was that Dark Souls kind of started off the new old trend of having difficulty reincorporated into video games. There's more I want to say about that, but I'm just kind of still trying to wrap my head around that stuff. And so, going back to the topic of like Devil May Cry and games similar to that vein, even though I think in some ways I was interested in the Devil May Cries, one of the biggest things that turned me away was the super combo heavy gameplay. To me, it just gets a little bit old and over the top and redundant and tedious very quickly, and that's kind of why I can't bring myself to even want to begin to play a game like Mortal Kombat, because I know it's just a combo fest and I'm like, I sleep. Or that other Dragon Ball game, I don't think it's like the sparkling game, whatever it was, the 2D one that looked cool as hell, but it was just a combo fest. Anyway, in my eyes, like a lot of these games are also like very niche games. Like I know that the people who play these games were like diehards and fanatics of that type of genre, but it never really had mass appeal. And I think Dark Souls slowly kind of crawled out of that hole and eventually captured the imaginations of a broader audience. Ziona said it's because Dark Souls came out the same year as Skyrim, and compared to each other, the difficulty is night and day. That's true. Yeah, to me, like, Dark Souls stands out in a time where, like, the games were becoming way more streamlined and a little bit baby mode and very handholdy to the player. And in a way, Skyrim is not that, but when you compare a game like Skyrim to Morrowind, it is clearly night and day. And man, it's been so long since I've played Skyrim. I'm kind of curious to see like what it would be like to go back and compare it to like the actual Ubisoftification of games currently today. Astanex, you wish Skyrim didn't come out when it did because you didn't play Dark Souls on release. Yeah, silly Astanex, you only had any of the other 1,300 times Todd Howard tried to sell you that game after the fact. Halo asks, do I think the Souls games would have been this successful without the lore and the PvP/co-op? Oh, definitely not. There probably would have been some diehards, but the PvP community is kind of what carried Demon Souls as like an import title, which gave them more confidence to do stuff in the West to port Dark Souls that way. And really, the PvP community, the co-op community, carried Demon Souls on its back. So, of course, it's very hard to like say all this stuff in the vacuum. It's like if things were different, they'd be different, you know? But I do know that like one of the reasons the games had as much longevity as they did is because of the covenants and stuff. And also being able to play with friends, the kind of weird nebulous connections that you make with somebody who's like in your world for 10 to 15 minutes and then they wave as they go by and then that's that, you move on with your life. I don't know, there's something kind of neat about the complete lack of proper communication skills in the games. And so I don't know. It's very hard for me to articulate this kind of thought. Like there's something cartoony and charming and frustrating about it all at the same time. Ziona says the PvP community was lost around Dark Souls 2. Was it? Because I always heard that DS2 had the best PvP. Elden said Quelaag told a story about how she and a bunch of others in the Demon Souls community became friends and started groups after ganking each other. Yeah. And that's true too. Like, people kind of made their own grassroots communities through stuff like this. And through those grassroots communities, people started talking about the lore and stuff like that. And of course, 4chan had a huge influence on spreading awareness about the games in the early days. So it's a very interesting question. Okay.
Not like pure action hasn't been done at various levels of budget, from indies to AAA. So what's the holdup? Well, the answer for why there isn't more is pretty straightforward and obvious. Good.
Oh yeah, that was the other thing I wanted to touch on. To me, I feel like while these games are very fun, it doesn't feel like you get very much game for the money for a lot of them. So maybe this is a little bit of an unfair comparison because I never really played a ton of this genre, but platformers in general, games like Mega Man to me, like I really enjoyed the hell out of them. For me, they're worth like $60. But I remember my mom got me, I think, X4 or X5 for one of as a gift for Christmas. And I beat it in like 3 or 4 hours. And she's like, "You beat it already?" And so like she felt like she got ripped off almost. But I mean, I did go back to continue playing it and like 100% it and just going through the games in like different sequences, which was, you know, one of the benefits of playing the Mega Man games that way, at least. So even though the games are short, or maybe they're not exactly short, they're just, you can complete them quickly, which maybe that's a little bit of a weird distinction to make. Like, it doesn't feel like an incomplete game, but it's just not one that takes a ton of time because it's not padded out by a very like long RPG battle sequence and things like that. Oh, I see what you mean, Zionis. You're saying that they didn't lose PvP as a system, but you lost the community because it changed from Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1 when DS2 came out. Okay, that makes sense to me. I can see what you mean by that now.
Good and deep action gameplay is really hard to make and get right. For example, let's do a quick, basic mechanical comparison between the two subgenres. There's a ton of weapons in Elden Ring, sure, but how many different types of physical attacks are there really? a one-handed and two-handed light attack, which can go up to a 2 or 3 hit string, a one-handed and two-handed heavy attack, which may also go up to a 2 or 3 hit string, a jumping attack, a rolling attack, a sprinting attack, a riposte, a backstab, and maybe a dual-wielding attack of some sort that's shared between multiple weapon types. That's
this noob forgot the crouch poke.
pretty much it. In terms of functionality, you can make a fully fledged weapon moveset with this checklist. Someone at FromSoft could maybe knock this out in a few days.
He also didn't say weapon arts, I don't think.
Perhaps even just one. Because these are all the moves you're given for any single weapon, and there's no real way to do a true, uninterruptible combo between them. You can't seamlessly transition from one into the other, such as doing a rolling attack and then canceling into a heavy. That's not a natural combo. An enemy can dodge or block between each hit. The game is pretty strict with how attacks work. Outside of natural strings, they're all isolated from each other and have very clear startup, active, and recovery frames, with no canceling into one another. That's a mechanical hurdle these games typically just avoid.
And of course, there are exceptions to the rules that he's making there. I do think it was a little bit reductive the way that he talked about how somebody could design all the attacks in the span of a day, because when you're creating these attacks, you also have to consider things like animation frames, hitboxes, hurtboxes, etc. But if he just means conceptually, I guess. But I also think there's a bit more nuance with how varied the weapon sets are in Elden Ring. Even though I think as a broader point, he is kind of right that it does get a bit stale, even though he didn't say it that way, with how predictable like each attack pattern kind of becomes, at least if you're the Tarnished. And now what he's saying here about like not being able to cancel out of a bunch of actions and stuff, I almost feel like Shadow of the Erdtree started to break that trend with regards to the boss design, because it really sucks that you're going to be sure to get hit if you misread a boss's neutral pose before they go into a follow-on attack. Looking at you, Bale. Gaius is pretty bad sometimes too. And of course, Promised Consort.
You can do block canceling and weird stuff like crouch.
And then Zionis is saying, you don't think these types of games disappeared? They just changed? You could argue that momentum shooters are the modern day beat-em-ups. I feel like nowadays the quote-unquote modern day beat-em-up is more or less Vampire Survivors or just indie games like the Turtles game, the new Power Rangers game that they're going to come out with, which is like the Turtles game. Stuff like that.
Canceling, but that tech is best used for PvP. There's no real need to whip that stuff out in single player. Conversely, how many attacks are in a game like Devil May Cry, and how many combos are there per weapon? And I'm talking about every unique sequence. That's a list that could take hours to make, and many moves have a very specific gameplay purpose too. Whether it's to interrupt enemy attacks, stun them, parry them, launch them into the air, or for extending combos, keeping yourself in the air, or repositioning, creating or closing space, many moves have a very specific purpose on top of dealing damage that need to consistently function. Not only is it a huge mechanical task, it's a huge animation one too, because attack animations with Rebellion are not going to look the same as animations with Cerberus, or in Ninja Gaiden's case, attacks with the Dragon Sword are not going to look the same as attacks with the Tonfa. There's a lot of animation reuse across weapons in Elden Ring and the Souls games as a whole, because there's distinct weapon classes, and the main differences between all weapons in one class is mostly their statistics, not moveset. So
I imagine he might get to this point eventually, but I'm assuming that probably one of the largest differences between a game like Devil May Cry and Elden Ring is perhaps the addition of co-op and PvP, because I would just imagine trying to PvP somebody that has this guy's moveset would just be a disaster the way he's zipping around, whereas There does need to be some amount of clarity and consistency between the movesets in Elden Ring that might make the comparisons a little bit unfair, even though there is a lot of thematic overlap in the game mechanics of these two games, I guess. Rachel Rogers, welcome back in. Nice to see you again.
Moveset can be important depending on what you're looking for. Souls games are not pure action. Every weapon isn't supposed to have their own bespoke animations and functions. That's not the kind of variety these games go for. Instead, they aim for build variety and enemy variety, so the player can come up with different strategies to the same problem, whether it's bashing the enemy in the head with the biggest stick they can find, exploiting elemental weaknesses from a distance, or just getting naked and rolling. There's a reason why challenge runs are a big thing. These games are very conducive to them, because it's about what you put on your character and not about the crazy shit you can make them do with a high amount of actions per minute. That's what the pure action games are about, and that's why they're harder to design. They need way more fine-tuning to get right, or you'll end up with Devil May Cry 2 instead of 3, and no developer wants that. Any studio that doesn't have either the passion or the prior experience making this type of game is typically unwilling to try.
So about that argument, he might be right here. I just don't feel like I have the depth of knowledge to know for sure if that's true or not. Because I imagine there has to be a lot of tuning that goes into the timing of enemy attacks in Elden Ring that probably makes things a lot more difficult than you'd expect. So, for example, how much recovery time should a enemy have after they finish an attack before they go into their next sequence of events and stuff like that? And that might seem maybe more negligible in a pure action game like Devil May Cry. I don't know if they have their Sunny D orange juice where you heal in between enemy attacks, or I really can't speak to that genre in general, but I don't know how true his statement is that the pure action game actually takes a longer time to develop. I'd be really curious to hear, or to like have a way to compare the two, because I don't even know if it could really be done. So anyway, Phantom Leaves and Impact Player, welcome back in, guys. How you doing?
Because it's a big task, especially for a genre that's still pretty niche. And I know that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if more devs took the chance to make pure action games, then the genre might be more popular. But, as of right now, pure action games aren't exactly setting sales records. Even Devil May Cry 5, the biggest out of all of them, just barely hit the 10 million sales mark after being out for 6 years. Elden Ring hit that number in just 2 or 3 weeks. Some people want to be pretty dramatic and pretend there's some secret, shadowy game developer cabal that's out to make action games homogenous in some grand, sinister scheme, but it's not like that. The boring, straightforward reason is that it's really fucking hard to make good, pure action games, and Soulslikes are just on fire right now. But again, China and the indie scene are both trying to pick up the action game slack, so maybe this conversation will be very different in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, so I kind of agree with him to an extent, but I don't know how much he's including Elden Ring or the FromSoft formula into the action game genre. It sounds like he's trying to keep them distinct, but just based off of like the recent games that have come out, with the exception of like Kazan, you've got what, AI Limit, Lies of P, Lords of the Fallen. Those are some of the other Souls-likes, and they each kind of have their own problems and don't quite feel quite up to the level of a FromSoft game. And I think that just goes to show like how difficult it really is to even get a Souls-like feeling good. So anyway, Globe was saying, absolutely. Imagine how hard it is determining the hitbox frames of hundreds of enemies and making every weapon type viable. Yeah, and then also like trying to make them feel fair to the player, and also punishing enough to whittle down their resources, but not overly punishing to the point where players are getting one shot and can't interact with the game. Without Horn says, you think there's also a difference in player expectations. You go into Souls games knowing you're going to start out kind of weak and then you become strong. But pure action games, you start out as a badass and gain variety and then strength. That's also a good point as well. I do think that Dark Souls probably does some of the best job in setting player expectations with the fact that you're going to get curb stomped immediately upon starting the game. And you either deal with it or you don't. It's kind of like the real litmus test of whether or not you have the intestinal fortitude to see it all the way through. And of course, there are pain points as people go along. The Anne Orlando Archers is an infamous spot which caused many people to quit the game, as well as Smough and, Ornstein. So, I digress. Impact says, part of the reason the Souls game sells because of the distinct story that From uses. DMC just isn't that lore dense. I think there is a lot of really good world building, which helps keep the mystique of the Souls games going on, but they're also not super lore dense or even story dense if you choose to not interact with it. So to me, like, a lot of the story of a FromSoft game is very much optional. Zionis says DMC is like the evolution of a beat-em-up, combo-based high-intensity action game. Momentum shooters like Ultra Kill is just an FPS conversion of the genre. It's all Doom carcinization. Lies of P slander. Look, I'm not saying Lies of P is bad. I'm just saying that there are certain aspects of it which don't quite live up to FromSoft level quality for me. I think it gets a little bit too punishing if you get hit in that game, which, could be tweaked pretty easily. Like, I don't think there's anything like systemically wrong with the game, but it just felt a little bit off. And I did enjoy Liza P, don't get me wrong. Hey, Captini, welcome back in. Devil May Cry would sell better if Dante was not acting like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. Rachel says, pure action games like DMC are really only hurt by competitive online games. Why would someone who has that kind of skill and dedication not want to show it off? That's an interesting point as well. I mean, some people don't like competition, but yeah, like, we do have a lot more fighting games. I wonder if that's kind of what cannibalized some of the pure action game market, because if you need to play the keyboard piano, then you better do it in front of an audience. And back in the day, you only really had couch co-op, but now we do have more multiplayer stuff. So there's probably a bit of a cannibalization going on with like what Zionis was saying with the shooters and perhaps even like fighting games and just more like online connectivity in general than in the days of the not OG Ninja Gaiden, but like the 3D Ninja Gaiden games. Okay, let's go back in.
And speaking of homogeneity, there's one specific game mechanic that's become somewhat controversial among a particular group of action game players recently: parrying. Basically, every action game that's come out in the last several years has parrying in some form or another, and some of them even make the move the centerpiece of the combat loop. As a result, there's an increasing concern that parrying is making action games very formulaic and in some cases too forgiving. At first, I thought this complaint was kind of ridiculous, but after thinking back on all the action games I've played in the last several years, there is some validity to this concern. However, I still believe
I get what he's saying, and I can appreciate the use of the Final Fantasy 16 footage here, but I also don't think FF16 is meant to be like an actual serious competitive type of hard, difficult game. I think it's supposed to be on the low side of challenge, and it's very forgiving, I think. But maybe I might be a little bit biased because I've played enough action games where this just felt a little bit shallow. But yeah, I don't know. Kazan has like 3 or 4 different types of parry. It does, and I was actually surprised that I ended up liking them. Ironically enough, I'm really bad at using the counter parry as opposed to the reflection parry. And even like the guard parry. Even Monster Hunter added parries out of the wazoo. Okay, so now that you brought up another game, I may as well bring up one of the things that I was just thinking about a moment ago. With the pure action game, I wonder how MildConviction feels about a game like Dynasty Warriors within this mashup of genres. Because I feel like in many ways, Dynasty Warriors is almost the proto Dark Souls, and it's closer to the Souls formula than the Ninja Gaiden based off of what I see. Although it seems like the in-between of them, to be honest. Like, there's a lot of juggling that I saw in that Ninja Gaiden footage, which turns me off. And some of the ways that the player is being attacked did remind me of Dynasty Warriors. I definitely remember being in, like, the final Way Castle in Dynasty Warriors 2 and 3 and being shot by, like, a bazillion archers. So I especially felt that watching that footage a moment ago. Iman says the hardest one is Sekiro, and it's not even a Souls game. I feel like the only reason why Sekiro is considered the hardest is because of balancing as opposed to like systemic stuff. So if you could deal more HP damage to enemies consistently and you didn't have to stance break them, I think Sekiro would have been received a lot more amicably. And that's why I think Kazan is probably like the sweet spot between going and investing into like the posture breaking and parrying stuff versus dodging and hitting the enemy directly. Skyleezy says Kingdom Hearts 1 has a dodge roll, which makes it a Souls game if you don't think about it. I mean, that might be fair. I really haven't played much of Kingdom Hearts at all, so you might be right to an extent. Pigsy does bring up the point, welcome back in, that Sekiro doesn't let you win by using a build or over-leveling. And that's another really big part of Sekiro that really caught a lot of people with their pants down. I was curious, I was like, why is everyone complaining about Sekiro? And then someone's like, you can't summon, you can't level up. I'm like, oh, right. The things I don't typically do. And Methoda, nice to see you again. Parrying can do some heavy lifting to convey the skill of the character. Using a little action to defeat a big action demonstrates that your character is more skilled than who they are fighting. If it's done right, I can agree with you, but sometimes like the parrying windows can be good or bad. Like if a parrying window is too forgiving, the game feels a little bit dull and like victory can be a bit of a foregone conclusion, which is kind of how I felt about Final Fantasy 16. I pretty much only died like a handful of times, and at least 2 of that handful were because I wasn't paying attention to having killed a bomb, and then I was just kind of zoning out and standing too close to them as they exploded after their death. Oh yeah, Gwyn as the parry. The funny thing is I played through the entirety of Dark Souls 1 and didn't parry at all until I saw Gwyn. Anyway.
It's partially poisoned by excessive panic in some respects. So, why has parrying become so common? Again, there's no industry-wide conspiracy. The real reasons are pretty straightforward. The first and most obvious one, parrying is cool. Parrying in an action game looks cool and makes you feel cool, and that's a primary concern for many people who play these types of games. They want to look and feel like badasses. If any game genre would be correct to prioritize the rule of cool, it's pure action games like these, and parrying is probably the easiest way to get that done. After that would be the second most common mechanic of perfect dodges, as seen in Bayonetta and Final Fantasy 16. Both mechanics have resemblances, specifically being timing-based, which seems to be the crux of many people's issue with them. Both parrying and perfect dodges are very powerful equalizers that allow you to totally bypass combat interactions after some practice. But the enemy throwing out an attack for you to parry or dodge usually is meant to be the interaction. This is a topic that might warrant its own video, but one thing I've learned from watching or reading developers discussing the base concepts and design goals of their game is that there's things they don't want to challenge the player on because it would detract from what they do want to challenge the player on. And if they want to challenge the player's ability to perform timing-based maneuvers, then that's their prerogative. Furthermore, if you get good enough at almost any game, you can completely skip interactions anyway. This isn't a phenomenon limited to pure action games. Even turn-based RPGs let you take advantage of weaknesses and status effects to potentially nuke bosses so fast you don't even see half of their attacks, even if it's your first time playing. In some cases, there's options to one-shot bosses, such as Final Fantasy letting you kill zombie enemies instantly by throwing a phoenix down or casting life on them.
What a classic mechanic. I wonder if that was a bug and it just kind of worked in the player's favor. But anyway, Zyro, nice to see you again. So, as he was talking about why let Parry being a thing in these games, I was considering, from a design point of view, in many ways, it would be a hell of a lot easier for me as a designer to be able to create a cool interaction between the player and the PC, or NPC, PC as in like computer, not PC as in player character, if I had a kind of predetermined baseline of where the player's position would be and how long it would be for me to have the computer input its next attack and things like that. So if you have a perfect parry, or even like, no, I'm going to stick with a perfect parry. So if you have a perfect parry, you have a pretty damn good baseline understanding of what the character's position is, how long it'll take for the player to be able to react after parrying to the next move, or will the player be able to counter on their own? Those are some really good things that you would be able to establish for having a perfect parry system. However, with a perfect dodge, you could still kind of have that to a degree, but it would introduce a lot more variety depending on the direction that the player dodges. So that isn't necessarily a good or a bad thing. It just makes it a little bit more difficult to keep track of the player and curate a back and forth between the player and the computer, which is probably still better that you would have a perfect dodge scenario to keep the timing of things tight, as opposed to no interaction with that whatsoever, because you could probably add more like event flags and things to recognize what the player did, as opposed to just going in a dead zone spot and attacking them without being able to like track where they are without like more robust detection features, I guess. That's a terrible way to phrase it, but hopefully you guys understand what I'm saying. You wouldn't suplex a train. You would if you're Sabin from Final Fantasy VI.
High or even just above average level play is not representative of everyone's experiences with a game, especially since most people don't even play a game for long enough to become particularly knowledgeable or good at it in the first place. Seriously, just look at the achievement or trophy stats for any given game and you'll figure that out very quickly. Another comment I don't agree with is combat based around strict timing windows being fake difficulty. Frankly, this one puzzles me, because an opinion I have always held and seen many others hold is that fair difficulty is when strict gameplay aspects like this allow you to adapt and slowly make the game easier with practice. And fake difficulty is when you're forced to take hits you have no idea are coming until it's too late, meaning the game completely ignores your skill level and takes agency away from you. Typically, people don't enjoy it when an action game removes control. It feels contradictory to the idea that it's skill-based, at least in part. I called parrying and perfect dodges equalizers a minute ago, and that's another reason why people like them. They're reliable ways to get past offense. and why shouldn't you be allowed to get past offense once you put the time into practicing doing so? I believe the very idea of a game starting off difficult but getting easier with practice is the essence of a well-made action game. This might sound too lenient, but if you take the time to perfect the timing and function of your defense, or offense, because in some games that is the best defense, then you should be allowed to waltz through the game untouched. Now don't misunderstand, I can appreciate wanting to be kept on your toes in different ways as a game goes on. I am not against that idea and enjoy games that do it too. But if a game clearly wants me to practice at a specific mechanic, then why should it regularly be putting me in situations where that practice doesn't matter? To many, that's just bad player feedback and reeks of inconsistency, which is arguably the biggest crime an action game can commit. It just doesn't feel good, and game feel is a very important aspect to action games.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think that's also partly why Elden Ring in particular had a lot of people complaining about how frickin' delayed many of the attacks that certain enemies performed were. So, damn Morgott with his Irish weapon slam is probably one of the most emblematic of that, because it makes it a lot more difficult to try to figure out when to parry when the timing seems inconsistent. And there's definitely been a couple times where you've been faked out by enemies in the previous games, but it felt like it was turned up quite a bit for Elden Ring. And just the other night, or the night before the other night, when we were watching that video about hitboxes and adaptability in Dark Souls 2, like the way that the pursuer clipped that guy's foot and just kind of auto-grabbed him looked really bad. And for me, I was saying, like, that doesn't look like a bad roll, because the player definitely waited until he saw the pursuer move beyond the telegraph, like, wind up. He waited until, like, the second aspect of the wind up starting to go into the transition of the actual attack to roll. And so that did not look bad to me at all. And that kind of stuff, if that's inconsistent and you have to learn it between each enemy, that can be fine if that's kind of how the entirety of the game works. So you need to learn enemies at an individual level. But if you have an indicator that tells you, like, you need to block, or like a sound effect that tells you need to block to parry or something like that, and then if you do it at what you think is the appropriate time and then get punished anyway, that can feel kind of unfair, because you're being given a tell that might actually be hurting you than if the tell wasn't there at all. So, Mal, welcome back in. What he says, the delays are always shown. Every delayed attack is telegraphed by an actual movement. Like, Morgott has to actually brace, then he immediately hits. Right, so some of it, I'm not saying, like, Margit is bad or anything like that. It's just that that boss in particular caused much more of an outcry than in previous games. Shillelagh, okay.
As nebulous as the concept might be sometimes. This also circles back around to being another part of looking and feeling cool. Being able to go back and clear out rooms of enemies and utterly crush bosses without getting so much as a scratch is a reward in itself. It feels cool as fuck. With all that said though, parrying can be implemented in good and bad ways. Good ways to implement parrying is to simply keep them as a high-risk, high-reward method of defense. Some people may resent Souls-like combat for being everywhere nowadays, but typically they do a decent job at keeping parries in that level of risk-reward balance, though admittedly the timing can be quite generous depending on the game. If you time a parry right, you can do a riposte for huge damage. If you time it wrong, you're gonna eat shit, and that's fine. It's tough enough that most people still prefer to just dodge. Another way of implementing parries in a good way is the Royal Guard method of Devil May Cry, where if you time a guard correctly, you can gain a big boost to your...
He says, you can also technically parry by clashing your attack against an enemies, but that's extremely difficult to do consistently. Very, very few people have time to practice something like that. Anyway, here's me badly practicing Royal Guard with Virgil.
Style meter, and a boost to your Devil Trigger gauge. But if you mistime it, then you still block, but you spend Devil Trigger instead. This is less risky than just mistiming it and getting slammed, but it does make it clear that Royal Guard is something that requires practice. And if you don't and have a habit of hitting it early, you'll run out of DT, which will make blocking impossible until you have some back, and you can't activate Devil Trigger anymore, which is needed to regain health and survive difficult fights, etc. The consequences of fishing for that perfect block are more passive, but still big. At the end of the day though, you can still get through the game just fine without ever touching Royal Guard anyway, because the game has a ton of defensive options, such as having invincibility frames for every type of jump and dodge, which is a little fact that new players take a very long time to realize. Basically, the best ways to have a parry is to give them some sort of negative effect if you fail them, and ensure the player has other ways to reliably defend themselves if parries are too tough to pull off or don't cover every situation. Now, probably the biggest issue with parrying mechanics is that sometimes it's so strong that it becomes the only defensive maneuver people use. In the worst
Or in the case of Sekiro, the only defensive maneuver in the game. Obviously, you do have like dodging in Sekiro and the Goomba Stomp, which is really good, especially against like Odin. But yeah, I do think Sekiro obviously leans too heavily on the parry mechanic to posture break enemies. So anyway, Shiloh7377. Sorry, I missed your message earlier. Welcome into the stream. Nice to have you. Without horns, you never liked Royal Guard? I have no idea what it is. It seems to me more like the Lies of P Clash deflect parry. Is that what it is? Because anyway, let me know why you didn't like it, because I don't have enough context.
Worst case, a game pretends it offers defensive options that are just as good, but parrying is the only thing that actually rewards you with big opportunities, so you feel obligated to parry anyway. So players are now ignoring other options entirely. Or to reframe it slightly, it's also pretty annoying when a game tries to convince you that parrying is totally non-essential and can be ignored if you want, but if you don't do it, you can get two-shotted by trash mobs. This can be a problem that makes a game very repetitive, and it can be invasive in a game where people don't expect the mechanic to pop up. For example, I do love the combat of Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. One thing it did though was bring back the perfect block mechanic from the previous game that lets you shave off damage from an enemy attack with the press of a button right before it connects, even though it's a turn-based game. It can be helpful for tougher fights and maybe even necessary for the most brutal ones, but thankfully the game does not expect you to perform it 100% of the time. Enemy damage is not balanced around the assumption that you'll master perfect blocking immediately after starting the game. If it was, it would be insufferable. If a game has multiple enemy types that are vulnerable to different forms of counters, but parrying remains the absolute strongest option against all of them, then it feels mandatory. It can dilute every encounter into the same few steps every single time, but it still depends on the game. People who hate the prevalence of parrying might point the finger at Sekiro for making things worse.
Global said Like a Dragon is turn-based. From what I understood, I think it was originally started as kind of like a joke project, and the devs were like, you know what, this kind of slaps, and then they did it like for real. So yeah, I've never played any of the Yakuza games. Ziona says Y2K has this problem.
Because its entire combat experience centers around deflecting and the posture gauge. But Sekiro's combat is also loved for that exact reason. Because parrying is the weight-bearing mechanic for all combat, it offers a high level of consistency. If you can nail this one mechanic down, then you can finish the whole game. Of course, it's not the only thing you'll be doing. You will still dodge, use prosthetics, and Makiri counters, but if you can deflect, then you can do those things too. What some people might bemoan as homogeneity in some games is simply considered reliability to others. Now, you could make the argument that maybe you should be punished a little bit more for missing a deflection in Sekiro, but that's a bit of a slippery slope, because deflecting is such a core element of the game that making it more punishing might be like adding more punishment to aiming down sights in a military shooter. It's something you're expected to do in basically every fight, so it would be giving mixed messages if you're kicked in the balls for doing it. Again, those contradictory signals don't feel very good. A balance is definitely required. To summarize everything, I know the heavy presence of Soulslikes is sometimes annoying, especially when there's other types of action games that suffer from a lack of new releases. Seeing a promising action game only to find out it's another Souls-like might be frustrating, but pure action games are just really difficult to get right. I absolutely do wish we got more Ninja Gaiden and Devil May Cry clones, yes, but if you're going to make games like those, you need serious dedication and, ideally, previous experience too.
Do you guys feel that way as well? Do you get disappointed if you learn that a game is going to be a Souls-like? I don't necessarily feel that way unless I think the reason that they're Souls-like is because it seems as though they're trying to very obviously be a copy or a knockoff of the Souls formula, and they're not really trying to do their own thing. So, for as much as I did enjoy the game, I feel like Lords of the Fallen 2023 suffered from that to an extent, and that the game probably would have been stronger if it developed a bit more of its own core identity and was more willing to deviate from the traditional FromSoft formula, because FromSoft had already deviated from that formula. But like, I don't necessarily get disappointed when I see a game like AI Limits unless I start to play it and then I realize it's a Souls-like, but it's not a very good one because it just doesn't get what made the Souls games good. Impact Player says you don't get disappointed. Scowleasy doesn't. Impact just cares about how it's done. Xeonis is only disappointed if they fail to realize that Souls games are liked. Okay, so it seems like we're all more or less on the same page. Mao wishes the combat could be more fluid in some of them. Fair. All right. So when I asked without horns about the Royal Guard counter stuff before, he said it's the only guard in the game. It has a counterattack. The more you parry, the stronger your counter becomes. It makes you stop moving and locks you into the guard for a second. As such, the Royal Guard breaks your game flow. Okay, I see. Thanks. Yeah, because I would definitely have not understood why you disliked it or like how that interacts with the game without that. Appreciate that. What do you've never played a non-From Souls-like? Let me think how many I've played. I've definitely played Lords of the Fallen, Lies of P. I didn't play the Jedi Warrior one. I know a lot of people call that one a Souls-like. I heard it was pretty good, but I'm kind of over Star Wars after the prequels and the sequels. So yeah, those are pretty much, I think, maybe the only two. Oh, I did play a little bit of Neo. I still want to go back and play Mortal Shell someday. And then in the somewhat near future, I might try like Crab Souls or like the really trippy Souls that I've got saved somewhere. Global says Crab Souls is legit very good. I love how we don't even call it by its real name, and so I only ever know it as Crab Souls. We watched a video the other day that called it, is it like another Crab's Treasure? Because if I did not see that video yesterday or the day before, I would not be able to. It's a Souls-like? Oh, wow. Man, that's good. Okay. Rachel says it's only because the term means so little now, they don't get why you liked Dark Souls. I-Man says the Star Wars game is a Souls-like too. I heard Wukong was also Souls-like, but I didn't play that. And then there was another one, Stellar Blade. I didn't play that. Honestly, like Stellar Blade just wasn't on my radar. Like whenever I hear Stellar Blade, I think of a different kind of game that seemed more like a BR, which I can't remember the name of that one right now. You want to hear the LP vocal repertoire for Crab Souls characters? Joke's on you, Global. I would only ever do the crab people voice from South Park. Wo Long is Soulslike. Is that game out now? Stellar Blade is more like Nier from what you've heard. Yeah, but people said Nier was also like a Souls-like when it came out. Wo Long's been out for a while now. That's true. Yeah. I vaguely remember hearing about it on the release, and people were just saying like it was not bad. Like it was pretty good, but not like great. Probably that's why I forgot about it. Oh, that is right, Scalise. I do vaguely remember, I think, seeing his shows like in one of the trailers. Did I say Nier? Stellar's more like Nier. Oh, without Hornsent. Oh, God. Oh, God. So, this is embarrassing, but I'll tell you my thought processes here. When without Hornsent, Stellar Blade is more like Nier. In my head, this Nier is like the Bostonian way of saying Neo. So I interpreted Neo instead of Nier. All right, anyway, let's go back into the video.
There's some interesting upcoming games from Chinese and indie developers, which is great, and I'm keeping my eye on them, but even then, it's no guarantee they'll all be home runs. Souls-likes are plentiful because they're just simpler at a mechanical level. They're popular because they rest in a Goldilocks zone of high challenge, high gratification, high variety, and low complexity. It's not a surprise that any studio would want to make one. And in regard to parrying, yes, there's some poor implementation of the mechanic, but it's popular for a reason too. Players feel cool for performing them, and they add a protective layer of consistency so that anyone playing the game knows they have a strong defensive option to use when they need to. Though it usually requires some practice, and it should, because a defensive mechanic so strong shouldn't be so brainless. Parrying can make a game boring if it ends up being the only worthwhile defensive maneuver in the game, but some people enjoy that reliability too. That one mechanic that anchors the entire experience, keeps it focused, and is always useful. It just comes down to implementation and what other mechanics are surrounding it. Not every game mechanic trend is some grand conspiracy to create homogeneity. Sometimes these trends persist because they sit in that small but important spot where both developers and players enjoy that thing, because it's easy to implement for the former and satisfying to use for the latter. Yeah, it can get tiring if you lose interest, or if you never cared for it at all, but that's...
Oh God, I just had the realization that DDR and Stepmania are all just parry likes.
just the nature of every trend. Back in 2005, Resident Evil 4 and God of War came out only 2 months apart from each other, and that was apparently enough to make everyone have to deal with 10 years of QTEs in action games. Sometimes they were implemented thoughtfully, and sometimes they were intrusive and annoying and used as an obvious and poor attempt to mask a lack of real depth. This shit just happens. Before I close the video, please consider checking out my merch store. As of right now, I have 2 shirt designs, a sliced skull and a tribute to Hironobu Sakaguchi, creator of the Final Fantasy series. I also have a beanie with my logo embroidered on it, great for the cold weather. Both shirt designs are available in lightweight fabric and heavyweight cotton. I've already received samples of everything for quality checking, and I can confirm they look great in person. If you're interested, visit MildConviction.com or check the store tab of my YouTube channel page. This concludes my thoughts on Souls-likes taking over the action genre and the parry problem. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.
All right, so that was an interesting video. I thought I was gonna go into like more of a complaint about it, so that kind of caught me off guard. It's fine. I don't know what else I really expected, to be honest. But yeah, I do think some of the arguments might be coming from places of ignorance or ways that we can't really falsify if they're true or not, whether or not it's easier or harder to make a quote unquote true action game, more in the vein of Devil May Cry versus Elden Ring. But I would be very curious to see if there was a designer in common between the two games and if there's any way we could settle things there, because I imagine things aren't going to be as straightforward as one might expect. So anyway, I enjoyed that. Did I share it with you guys? Yes, I did. I sent the link to MildConviction's video there if you want to give him some support. And next on the menu, we have A Cursed Divinity by the Honored
the
Madman.
is my people's enemy.
Wait, why can't I pause there? That's weird.
By Marika long betrayed, set aflame. Understand, your kind are not forgiven. They are three faithful. Never will I see your kind as worthy.
The Bleach music, it's a little bit loud compared to the voices.
Alright, welcome back to Honored Madman for yet another installment of Shadow of the Erdtree lore. I'm your host, Honored Madman. I hope everybody's doing well. So today we're going to be once again talking about the Hornsent, and I know, didn't I just cover them a few days back? Well, that was more like a lore journal style video. I was still learning things as I was making it. But unsurprisingly, it turns out that there was a lot I missed and misinterpreted, so this video is going to be full of corrections, and it's going to be more of a definitive history of the Hornsent style video. Because man, what a lore-rich people. So there was a time back during the days of the Spiral Tower, way back before the various crucibles were spurned in favor of the Erdtree, that horns would often sprout, or rather bud, on beings that didn't typically bear horns, be it animals or people. I mean, that's all the Hornsent are, really, just people who have horns. And they credit this evolutionary advancement to the Crucible, or should I say the Crucibles, because there appears to be more than one. But the Crucibles are essentially a mystic nature force that is said to be quite strong in the lands that surrounded this very center of the lands between, which are of course now covered in shadow. And in many ways, the Hornsent can be viewed as the people of the Crucibles due to their close connection to them. They seemingly viewed themselves as close to the divines due to the many blessings that the Crucibles had granted them, the most cherished of which was their horns. So we talked a little bit last time about the strange and foreign customs of the people of the tower or the Hornsent, such as their love of hunting, cooking, and eating the spider scorpions that are also native to these lands. What's interesting about the scorpions is that it was said up until very recently they were much smaller, and that these giant ones can be traced all the way back to the Church of the Bud, which really isn't that surprising given Ramina's appearance as a giant scorpion lady. She's actually more like a mashup of a bunch of different insects, but you get what I mean. And aside from their scorpion-focused cuisine, there was also another hallmark of the Hornsent culture. They had a...
And Ramina's design is so cool. And that was another boss where I was really glad that I had not used Shadow Tree Blessings, because she was kind of a pushover once you just walked up to her and smacked her in the face.
A generations-old traditional fighting style consisting of two curved blades held backhand style. Mastery of this discipline looks quite literally like a storm of swords. Definitely one of my favorite DLC weapons. Now, as for magic, the Hornsent had the incantation.
Yeah, aren't these weapons like the OP speedrun weapons now?
Of the spiral. And if there's one thing the Hornsent really love, it's their spirals. The spiral in general, as well as their great spiral tower of Veneer Elim. They were symbols of great religious importance to the Hornsent, and it's allegedly based on a normalized crucible that one day will form a column that reaches to the gods.
Not speedrun, probably RL1 runs or something like that. I don't know.
Most Hornsent spirits you come across are capable of using these incantations, but there were some who became lost in the bitterness of the collective fate of their people, and these individuals abandoned the use of spiral and tower incantations as it brought them nothing but despair and ruin, and instead they turned to thorn sorcery of all things in their despair, something the thorns were synonymous with. So while the Hornsent religion was mainly centered around spirals, spirits, divine beasts, and horned gods, there also appears to have been a faith dedicated to something known as the Bud, as seen here. Now this bud in question may be the bud at the end of this spiral tree on the Berserk tablet found in Bellarat.
I thought he was about to say the bud that I smoke at the end of this video. I don't know why. Just a little bit too low-hanging fruit. Anyway, Hilko, nice to see you again. Welcome back in.
Tower. There's actually a bunch of these tablets lying everywhere, so it's kind of hard to miss. So while we don't know exactly what the bud is, we do know that the scarlet rot was weaved from the bud by Ramana during the burning of her church. She prayed that these new buds would...
It's a little bit backwards. I know the localization really misleads some players there, but maybe he's just kind of phrasing things oddly here.
Would find purchase elsewhere, and find purchase they did. Not just in anyone, no, a full-blown Empyrean, and in many ways this...
Yeah, so this is one of those things where we were just having a discussion about this earlier this week about whether or not Ramana did her stuff with the Scarlet Rot before millennia. We do know that the Crusade may have happened before Radagon had his union with Marika. At the very least, we know the Carians were born, and it seems unlikely that the Crusade would have happened much later. Therefore, Mikkel and Melania may not have been born yet. But we also don't know how long it took for Ramana to turn to the Scarlet Rot. So this is a pretty big difference in the localization of Ramana's remembrance. I've got a video on my channel about it. It's very, very short. It's like a minute long, where it says something to the effect that Ramana turned to the Scarlet Rot once her church was burned in the hopes that it would allow her bud to bloom again one day. But when you look at her bud, it still remains unbloomed, so she might be a little bit bamboozled the same way that others get bamboozled by the frenzied flame. Who knows?
This was Ramana's final revenge against Marika as well. And curiously enough, after Melania had her epic fight with Radon, she left a sort of spiral root tree that some would say reaches into the very heavens itself in the exact place that she bloomed. In this imagery of buds and spiral root trees, it seems to be very evocative of the spiral bud tree on those tablets in Bellarat. So anyway, every Hornsent has horns, hence the name, but the ones born with tangled horns were destined for greatness. That is, if they managed to survive their infancy. I mean, that was the catch-22 of the Hornsent. While the tangled horns were said to be a sign of spirituality and divinity, many tangled horns died shortly after they were born. When this happened, and it did, unfortunately, rather frequently, these Tanglehorn Baron mementos were made to memorialize them. The Barons have the effect of attracting spirits due to the spiritual nature of the Tanglehorns, and can pretty effectively be used as tools in combat. Now, what of the Tanglehorns who managed to survive their rather troubled infancy? Now, these individuals were expected to become revered spirit ash dispensers, or rather tutelary deities as they're called. In real life, tutelary deities are essentially guardian spirits that protect like a specific place or a person, or sometimes this expands to the protection of a specific lineage or an entire people. So the Tanglehorns were expected to become guardian spirits, effectively like kami in Japanese folklore. And while this was said to be a great honor, it was also extremely difficult, and many of them washed out and became curse blades instead. Now the curse blades, and I don't think that was their given names, were an order of ascetic monk-like guardians of old ruins and quarantined villages. A couple of them can even be found at Bellarat Tower and the Spiral of Anir Lim. At one point, a number of them were rounded up and imprisoned for an unknown reason, but curse blades are extremely talented dance fighters that wielded a pair of unique bladed cirque weapons, and their dance-like fighting style was said to be self-flagellating in nature, so it seems to have been designed to hurt them, as perhaps some sort of penitence for not becoming true tutelary deities. Or
I think it might be that they were trying to flagellate themselves of their impurities, so that way they could get the impurities out of them so they could become tutelary deities, but part of the reason I was really stopping the video is to just say, like, how cool the Curse Blade design was. I remember how everybody was freaking out when we had the picture of the Curse Blade posted to the Twitter and whatnot, and everyone's like, oh man, this boss is going to be so cool. And then somebody on the Discord's like, no, that's not going to be a boss. That's just going to be a regular dude. And everyone's like, no way. There's no way something this cool could just be like a regular dude. Turns out it was a regular dude. That was a little bit irregular, but anyway. Impact, you remember that? Hilko, you wish it was more like we thought at first. But they were cool regular dudes that pummeled you for a bit. They are pretty scary, though. Like, a lot of the big Hornsent guys are pretty deadly. Honestly, like, seeing how cool and deadly some of the DLC bosses were, it makes me salty all over again that we really had no connection between the DLC and the base game. I thought it would have been super cool almost if we had, like, a Legend of Korra-esque situation where the Shadowlands gets reintegrated into the Lands Between, and then the Lands Between gets updated with like new locations and new enemies and locations. So there's more reason to go back to the main game and explore. And then that way they could have, given the full world its original vision that they didn't have the time to do. But obviously things did not turn out that way, for better or worse.
Was developed to honor the lion dance. Either way, though, when the times of war came to the lands that would become known as the Lands of Shadow, this self-flagellating dance got turned on to the invaders as well. And the strict monk-like discipline that these curse blades achieved while attempting to become deities served them quite well in their new roles. I mean, they went from attempting to become guardian spirits to becoming guardian monks. It's tough to say if this was born from a sense of duty or if it was by choice. In theory, the curse blades should have no love for the Hornsent, who stuffed them into jails just like anybody else. But on the other hand, the curse blades appear to be gluttons for punishment, judging by their self-flagellation, so maybe they're just into being treated like shit. It's probably
not only that, they might not appreciate their kindred being genocided, even if their kindred locked them away. And that is something that I've also wondered. It's like, why did they go to such lengths to fight the invaders when they were put in the jails? So did they kind of put themselves in jails? Did they go there willingly because they knew that they were like failed products, essentially? It sure would be nice to have more info about anything in this game. So anyway, I wanted to welcome back in Meow Laser, Zafe the Scholar, and Sohelanthropus. How's it going?
probably just some monk.
We should go back and look at some of those old lore videos of people guessing what the enemies were. I don't know. Sometimes it feels a little bit too easy to like go back and look at that stuff and laugh in a way that might feel a little bit mean-spirited. So like I might like look back at something like mine, but even for me, I would feel too embarrassed and cringy to actually want to go through with it. So I feel like if I'm not even willing to take the piss out of myself, that I probably shouldn't do it to others. Hindsight's 2020, yeah.
Thing that I wouldn't understand. These guys abstain from their indulgences, and I submerge myself within mine. Either way, though, the fact remains that these guys are 100% built for defending and protecting the dilapidated, rundown ruins of a fallen civilization, and they look the part too, which really is the most important thing. Anyway, though, that wasn't the only alternative if you managed to wash out of becoming a tutelary deity. The other alternative for a prospective Tanglehorn was the path of the Inquisitor. They appear to be a religious order as they wield these golden barbs and act as confessors for the Hornsent religion. Coercive questioning being their specialty, which is really just another fancy word for torture, so they were essentially torturers. Which again is hilarious because they also serve as priests. Very fitting. They sometimes refer to themselves as sorcerers, and their magic is referred to as a sorcery, even though the magic itself is simply wielded as an incantation of the tower. So it's basically a sorcery used as an incantation for some bizarre reason. Anyway, the Inquisitors come in a couple different flavors. There's the Elder Inquisitor, who I believe is only...
So that's kind of something that isn't terribly uncommon with the FromSoft games, where heretics end up using the off-spec magic. So technically, is from the game's perspective, they're using incantations, but the lore makes it clear that those so-called incantations are actually sorceries. So at least with Dark Souls, sorceries were related to the soul. We don't really have quite that dichotomy going on in Elden Ring to say whether or not it's soul, it's a memory, it's runes, or anything in between the two. Say if you're positive the final boss leak was people trolling because there's no way for your brain to make it make sense. I was just highly skeptical of everything, and so I didn't want to believe anything. I was doing pretty well not really saying spoilers, but because I had to moderate my damn spoiler chat in my Discord server, I did see the name Rolana through my very quick cursory scan to make sure that nobody was being mean to each other. And then my day was immeasurably ruined at that point on. Like, to me, Rolana was such a damn lame name for like a sister of Renala. But I mean, I wasn't necessarily surprised that Renala would have had a sister, but just I don't know why Rolana bothered me so much, but it did. And True Connoisseur loves it. I hate you.
Only found in the form of Jory, and then there's two others, regular or Discord mod. Oh, I almost forgot, there's also these antler-headed sons of bitches in Anir Elim who spam cast the spiral incantation on you as soon as you step into their range. And they seem to be senior inquisitors, probably lower ranked than Jory, but maybe higher ranked than the average ones we see, and possibly the fat ones as well. Although the fat one...
You said Rolana's like Godefroy? I would not say that much. At least Rolana did have some legitimate foreshadowing with the whole line about other Carian princesses, as well as the quote-unquote Three Sisters Towers. So the real question is, where is that third sister? Is it the Snow Crone? Is Rolana the Snow Crone? I don't know. Hey guys, where's the Snow Crone? Alright, Elden enthusiast, you have a good night.
Ones do have the whole inhuman physiology thing going on, so they might actually be quite high ranked as well. So these guys served as priests and religious fixtures at the Great Spiral Tower of Anir Elim alongside the Masters of the Storm themselves, the Divine Beast Warriors. At one point, a massive army of Inquisitors led by Elder Inquisitor Jory was sent into the Abyssal Woods following Midra's discovery of an orange flame that was capable of burning anything, even spirits. And naturally this scared the ever-loving fucking shit out of the Hornsent, so they in turn sent this ridiculously large force to suppress it, regardless if Midra was a friend of the Horned Folk and even had many Hornsent employed at his castle by that time who were fiercely loyal to him. None of that mattered. The flame needed to be contained. It couldn't be allowed to spread beyond the woods. I imagine they really didn't want it reaching places like the gravesite plain, for example, that's filled with those spirit graves. Now this inquisition into the Abyssal Woods seems to have succeeded in keeping it contained, which itself was mainly due to Midra's own enduring of the intense torture he suffered at the hands of these Inquisitors, but hilariously enough, many of the Inquisitors themselves fell to the madness while attempting to harness its power into incantations, with the resulting spell proving to be a meager victory at best over the flame. Now sidebar, I like how we got this.
I don't know if I would characterize it that way. Oh, this is a really cool frame to stop on. As much as it is potentially that, just like the way that the fire monks kind of turned into adherents of the fire giant's flames, the same thing may have happened to the kind of inquisitors out here. No, without horns, Midra does seem to be a Hornsent because the Hornsent ghost within the manse says that, like, you're killing your brethren, why would you do this, essentially. So even though we don't actually see horns on Midra, he seems to be of the same race as the Hornsent.
This somewhat origin of Frenzied Burst, because I don't believe there's any other characters or NPCs that use it throughout the game, just these Inquisitors. So I'm headcanoning that they invented it while they were on their inquisition into those Abyssal Woods. Again, a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. At least it's not just pouring from their eyes like it is every other frenzied enemy. At least there's some degree of control, which itself must be a testament to the Inquisitor's mental fortitude. I mean, you gotta hand it to them. Which I guess is exactly what it would take to carry out this type of work. Well, that or a strong faith, I suppose, because these Inquisitors tortured and executed a great many of Midra's castle staff, again, many of whom were Hornsent. You can actually see what appears to be an executioner's row of beheaded corpses with golden glowing bars shoved into their neck holes. But this
is actually how you make a two-finger. Nah, I'm kidding, I had no idea. Anyway, hey Stella, welcome back into the stream.
Inquisition was a spiritual undertaking, religious if you will, due to the threat it posed to the spirits who were very important to the Hornsent, and naturally following this, the land was declared forbidden to them for fear of them contracting the madness. It was said that the wise know to stay away, and this apparently extends even to Torrent, who, again, is basically a Hornsent horse, and he is described as old, which I think also implies wise. This could be the explanation behind why he sort of just fucks off for the entire section.
That's right, guys. Torrent is smart, yo. That's why he does not want to go in no Frenzy Flame swamp.
Of the Abyssal Woods. I suppose it would make sense to me. At least there's a lore reason behind it. I mean, Torrent is a spirit steed. He doesn't want to get melted away. Now, moving on to the military might of the Hornsent. It was certainly formidable. They were commanded and led by the Horned Warriors, essentially these hulking guardians who had attained their inhuman strength.
Is there... oh, maybe they're normal feet. I guess like the darkness of this made the toes look like claws to me. I was like, wait a second. Is there Hornsent warrior foot lore? I almost thought the feet that this guy had was almost like the damn Devonia centaur foot-like thing, which looked goofy.
Horned Warriors, essentially these hulking guardians who had attained their inhuman strength through divine invocation. Now, the Horned Warriors claim to descend from the first divine bird warrior named Ornis, who supposedly tamed the divine bird and conquered disguise with it until he eventually fell, and when he did eventually fall back to Earth, he lived on as a guardian deity of the temple quarter in Raoul, back when it was actually a city, and not an ancient ruin. Although the bird warriors can still be found amongst the ruins to this day, so I guess that's got to count for something. Anyway, these bird warriors, the disciples of Ornis, if you will, were said to have few worshippers due to their foul temperaments, pun intended. They were said to
I was going to make the joke if he didn't.
be mercilessly cruel, which again adds up because of their bird association. I tend to think of birds as cruel. And also within the world of Elden Ring, birds have a big association.
I gotta love Honored Madman for those non sequiturs that he just slips in sometimes. I tend to think birds are cruel. I'm sure like all you parakeet owners out there in the world are incensed at such slanderous dialogues. Anyway.
With death, as well as the storm, which I think they're leaning more towards here. And these guys' asshole temperaments is matched only by their fighting styles, which are extremely brutal, swift, and quick. They obviously possess a wide variety of bird-oriented attacks and are capable of manifesting crucible wings on a whim. Their leg armor is also equipped with talons that they can use to actually pick the player up and bring them into the sky to just chuck them back down. It's a pretty cool move. But these bird warriors are very few in number and presumably are quite ancient, even more so than a lot of the other stuff in this DLC, judging by their lore. And again, while they were viewed as cruel, they were nonetheless still deified and were honored as great warriors and defenders of the Hornsent and the Crucible, specifically the Temple Quarter in the Rao region. And of course, they are still regarded as the ancestors of the Horned Warriors, the military might of the Hornsent. Now, the Horned Warriors were also extremely deadly fighters in their own right, and while they practice a similar style of swordplay, these fellows also incorporate the divine act of horn calling into their combat style. And from what I can tell, horn calling is pretty self-explanatory. It looks like this. Another thing about these guys is they really don't know the word stagger. Sure, they could be stunned after like a chain of heavy attacks, they'll take a knee, but they'll never stagger, at least for me. The first place you'll likely encounter these guys is at the settlement of Bellarat Tower, where it's said that these warriors and their weapons are both considered spiritual vessels. A number of others is stationed across the ancient ruins of Rao, as well as its temple quarter. Bird warriors can also be found in these parts, as I already mentioned, serving alongside the Horned Warriors.
So the term there for spiritual vessel doesn't quite convey the way the Japanese has things phrased, and I don't think they even have a good English equivalent. So the term is yorishiro, and that is essentially it's almost like the trap in Ghostbusters where spirits get sucked into it and they like to live there. So it's essentially like a spirit Pokeball in a way. So, in a sense, it is a kind of vessel, and of course I'm very oversimplifying and making light of the situation, but For example, the Miko, the shaman of the shaman village, are also Yorishiro. Essentially, they're like mediums, which will allow spirits to possess them. And essentially, that's supposed to be what Radahn's body/soul is for Mikola. It's something that has enough attractive power to the remnants of the souls that it brings them back down to earth, essentially. So, just want to give that little bit of a context there.
There's also 2 ghostly spirit horned warriors that are
Moths to a flame. That's actually a pretty good metaphor for it, to be honest.
occupying Midra's manse along with that large force of inquisitors. They're of course there to either root out Midra or at the very least just contain his spread after he made contact with the...
Oh yeah, and then Zafe brings up the excellent point that Yorishiro are often things like trees, which is why in Japan you'll see many trees with the shimenawa around them, the straw rope, and you have the goofy straw rope man in Sekiro, which brings you up to heaven, essentially, as well, the Fountainhead Palace. So, a bunch of really cool imagery to bring up with, like, trees and divinity and souls, and the fact that in a near limb you've got people trees, as well as the Erd tree roots, having people kind of getting integrated into it as well.
Flame of Frenzy, you guys know, we went over this. But these horned warriors live in a state in between the physical world and the spiritual one, in a manner similar to the Belfry or Mausoleum Guardians, except they didn't even have to cut their heads off to achieve this state. Now, the greatest aspiration of the horned warrior was to become a divine beast warrior, and if they were particularly lucky, to take part in the lion dance. Now, each divine beast warrior mastered a different aspect of the storm, such as thunder, blizzards, or the very wind itself. These individuals wore horned lion masks that invoked the divine beast itself. These elite guardians serve only at the Spiral Tower of Anir Elim, where only a handful of them can be found. I think only 3 to be exact. And of course, the only thing more sacred than these divine beast warriors was the divine beast itself, as well as its puppeteers, for lack of a better term. These storm aficionados really were no joke, and truly were the greatest warriors of the Hornsent, and only the best of these individuals were selected to become sculpted keepers. And sculpted keepers were the individuals who did the lion dance. They, operated and maintained the puppet. And both the dancers and the puppet as well were deeply ingrained into Hornsent culture. It's a symbol of the very people themselves in many ways. And before Marika's betrayal, the lion dance was said to be a thing of beauty and grace, but after Mesmer's crusades began, it took on a new, more combat-oriented focus.
I can't wait until we get Shadow of the Halig Tree, when we get 3 sculpted keepers under a coat and they do the dragon dance instead. Ziona says, "What's the deal with the Deathblight Lion dancers?" Because he's now apparently Jerry Seinfeld. So what's the punchline, Zionis? Now, I know that was a more straightforward question. We don't really have a perfect answer for it, unfortunately. Some people think that because the Colosseum type thingy, the ruins here, is above the, what do you call it? The Deathblight catacombs down below. They think that this divine beast dancer could have been slowly infected by the Deathbite, and that's why the way it is the way that it is. Maybe that's also why it's got the basilisks around it. Maybe it was influenced by the power of those basilisks. So,
and by the time
and then Impact Player does bring up the true canonical reason. He says the deal is FromSoft hates us.
We get to the Shadow Realm, there's seemingly only 2 of these puppets left. One that obviously guards Bellarat Tower and serves as the first main boss of the DLC, and the other is doing a silent dance in an old temple at the ancient ruins of Ra'u, which itself was a place where the primordial crucible's presences could still be felt, at least somewhat strongly, safely out of sight and out of mind, and far enough away from the flames of Mesmer's army. So when Mesmer eventually hunted, gored, and impaled the great divine beasts, it was said to essentially be a giant funeral pyre for the Hornsent people as a whole. And perhaps this was the grand betrayal that the Hornsent NPC and the Grandma speak of. Now, some might argue that all this happened because a few Hornsent were kidnapping Newman and putting them into saint jars, but it's not quite that simple. We really don't know who drew first blood. The potentates of Bonny Village who did this to Marika's people were certainly an interesting group of Hornsent. They wielded these massive shimmering butcher knives and whips made of rotten teeth to help carry out their grisly work. And what that work consisted of, essentially, was carving up human and Newman to stuff into jars that they would stick into their frozen jails to essentially animate them into saint jars, I suppose. Outside of a loincloth, the only clothing these fellows wear are these bizarre masks of hardened caterpillars to ward off the thoughts of impurity, self-doubt, and other things one was vulnerable to while absorbed in their divine ritual. And this divine ritual in question I can only assume is the art of living jar crafting. I mean, what else could it be? Now, I believe the Hornsent's making of these saint jars from Newman women was in response to Marika's betrayal and not the cause of it, but it really could go either way, and it doesn't really matter because Marika went scorched earth on the Hornsent people regardless, although it still would be nice to know those details. So Marika went scorched earth, quite literally, and then cast a giant shadow that obscured these lands from the history of the lands between, and left her cursed son behind in this shadow realm to ensure that the Hornsent were burned for all eternity. Pretty messed up stuff. So as it turns out, being close to Divinity didn't save the Hornsent.
Thinking about the shadow stuff and the catacombs, when I know we have to burn the ceiling trees, so don't get me wrong, I definitely understand that aspect of things, but do we also have to shine a light on a near limb for it to become revealed, or is it already kind of basking light? It is always light up there, or day when you go up to the top, by the way, kind of like Fair Missoula, which may or may not be thematically connected to it, so it's just very strange that Marika did choose to bathe in shadow and what she did not. It got brought up again on the Discord today, but it's like, hey, if Marika didn't want people to burn the Erd Tree, why didn't she just encase the Forge of the Fire Giants in shadow as well? Very strange. Zay, if you're not disagreeing, but you wonder why he thinks the Hornsent used the jar rituals in retaliation, is there something you don't know about to suggest this? I don't necessarily think there's something we don't know about. I think that was just his take on things, because you weren't here at the very beginning of the video. He said that a couple days before he made this one, he was looking at the Hornsent and he had some things wrong. So this was him trying to rewrite the record of what he thought at the time. And so he might just be kind of mistaken here. So stuff like that doesn't really bother me too much, because Honored Madman is pretty clear that a lot of his stuff is headcanon, and also like his style of delivery. He just kind of lends to that kind of implicit understanding with the way he presents lore. And yeah. So Zionis, thank you so much for the 20. What's the deal with Deathblight Lion Dancers? Godwin was already a puppet. No need to make a puppet. What are they? Russian? Okay. Wait, is there a comment? Oh, from Zyro replying to that. That's interesting. I learned more about YouTube day by day. Scalise thinks the dancers were dead and they got reanimated by the Deathblight. I don't know. I don't think they're weak to, what do you call it? Litany of Proper Death. That might be worth testing. Although I guess the basilisks aren't either, are they? I never tested that, did I? I just took it for granted they weren't those who live in death. Who says Deathblight can't dance? Deathblight can dance if it wants to. It can leave your friends behind.
Hornsent from Mesmer's flames, and neither did it save them from this strange affliction that they were susceptible to. This fly sickness was a bizarre disease that plagued only the Hornsent. It literally turned them into flies through an extremely painful metamorphosis, and reportedly this...
All right, I'll need to back this up a little bit. Let's go a little bit further.
In this shadow realm to ensure that the Hornsent were burned for all eternity. Pretty messed up stuff. So as it turns out, being close to Divinity didn't save the Hornsent from Mesmer's flames, and neither did it save them from this strange affliction that they were susceptible to. This fly sickness was a bizarre disease that plagued only the Hornsent. It literally turned them into flies through an extremely painful metamorphosis, and reportedly this hurt from head to toe, but it's said...
You know what? I guess I took it for granted that the flies only affected the Hornsent, huh? Is it because they had cursed blood specifically? Is that where they get the Moog and Mother of Truth connection? I could buy that. But damn it, why do the red albinorks have little horns on them because of the cursed blood, but then these guys lose their horns when they become fly folk? Well, I guess the albinorks don't become fly folk, so maybe there isn't a disagreement there.
That they were relieved from the suffering and pain the exact moment the transformation was complete. They were then corralled to these secluded, quarantined areas like the Village of Flies and left under the care of revered spirits and cursed blade guardians. We can see the extent of this sickness at the abandoned ailing village early on in the DLC. Oftentimes the disease would ask to be put out of their misery, and their caretakers were obligated to end their compatriots' suffering with a ritual bone knife. And curiously enough, those who took care of the afflicted and saw to it that they got proper burials never contracted the horrifying disease themselves. I mean, they continue to live on even today like many Hornsent do as revered spirits, shadow ghosts. It's still currently unknown what exactly caused this plague, but my guess is that it has something to do with stagnation, as this land has clearly been affected by America's meddling with death itself, capital D. It's actually stated at the suppressing pillar that all manner of death winds up here in the Shadow Realm, only to be suppressed.
So yeah, as far as it being stagnation, I think that that's probably a big element of things there, because pretty much whenever you go to the places that the fly folk are located, with the exception of a near limb to a large extent, they kind of tend to be in areas that have like a ton of corpses or muck and stuff about. So I tend to think it's a bit of a more of a spiritual affliction, because those who use the Blades of Mercy did not contract the illness. I think it's essentially due to Hornsent becoming cursed somehow, either through the blood or anything like that. And so if a Hornsent dies before they become a flyman because they had their suffering ended, that might have stopped it before they could die and cause rancor to transform them a bit more. I don't know. It's really weird. The flymen do have horns? I don't think that's true, because I've definitely looked at them. If you wanted to show me a picture, by all means, I'd be willing to see it. I thought somebody else said something that I wanted to touch on. Oh yeah, so Hilko asked, if Bloodborne's an inspiration, the fly sickness would be the result of self-experimentation? No? Maybe. I guess it depends on what you consider the experiments to have been. I tend to think that there might be a bit of a connection between the horns, because they were Hornsent who were afflicted, and divine invocation, but that's just kind of headcanon. Alright, Ask Next, thanks for joining us. You have a good night.
And this fly sickness could be a side effect of that. It's also very reminiscent of the Locust Preachers in Dark Souls 3's DLC The Ringed City, where they filled a somewhat similar role. Now ultimately, it isn't quite clear how exactly America betrayed the Hornsent. So yeah, ultimately it isn't really clear how exactly America betrayed the Hornsent as a whole, but it can be surmised
I like how you just used the same two lines right there.
That she killed their god or gods. It could also, however, simply be referring to how America unleashed her mad dog son on them, as Mesmer just couldn't stop killing the divine beasts, which were said to be the closest things to the Hornsent's gods. And then we have this massive specimen in the aptly named specimen storeroom that is either their god or a very massive tutelary deity sort of hanging from the rafters. There's also plenty of divine beast corpses, some of which resemble ancestor spirits lying around, some also resemble Torrent, but much bigger and more bull-like. Honestly, this is less of a specimen storeroom and more of a trophy hall. And again, this alone could be the very source of the Hornsent's resentment. The divine beast.
So this is the second time where I've seen the mask and thought it looked like teeth everywhere. Anyway.
Hunt had annihilated their gods, and all that's left of members of their Hornsent divinity appears to be reduced to an old Empyrean grandma hiding out in an old storage closet of Bellarat Tower. She's an eccentric but ultimately very weary old lady who keeps a divine beast head close in reverence. She can't see all that well, and her cooking skills aren't really what they used to be, as the only ingredient she has left is hate. But if you happen to avenge her people, she's able to whip up one last gourmet meal worthy of a sculpted keeper. So whatever Marika did at the gates of divinity seemed to be what earned her the Hornsent's ire. I mean, all we see her do, though, is make that braid talisman in the commercial, so it's really tough to say what exactly she did besides, well, I don't know, all of the aforementioned shit, like having her cursed son burn the Hornsent, or obscuring these lands in shadow, cut off from...
So, I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, obviously there does seem to be a greater sense of betrayal there somewhere, but... the Hornsent NPC, the guy that's Miquella's follower, and Grandma seem to be cursing Marika specifically for burning the Hornsent and the Crusade, rather than something perhaps bigger, it seems. Maybe Grandma's motivations are different from Hornsent Bro, but she doesn't exactly say how or why, which leaves that up to us to decide.
The rest of the world.
And Saiwan, welcome into the stream. Religious uncleanliness taken to the extreme because of Michael Zaki? Potentially. There does seem to be a really strong component of the Mother of Truth with the fly sickness and the blood fiends. So I do think that it does tend to relate to cursed blood and something related to the Mother of Truth, because Moog and his bloody poop have like similar types of maggots going on as I think the flymen have and whatnot. So yeah, the uncleanliness of the soul does remind me of haram and things like relating to being kosher and stuff in the Old Testament.
And turning it into a dumping ground for death. And what's interesting in this world is that death sinks to the very bottom of the Shadow Realm, where it becomes putrescence, not unlike human dregs from Dark Souls 3. And funny enough, one blob of this putrescence managed to imbibe some of St. Trina's nectar, and boom, we got a melting skeleton centaur fucking Kaz on wheels type of boss. But anyway, though, the Hornsent's hatred was such that even armor pieces of religious significance to the spiral or to their people make the blessing of the Erd Tree nauseating for the wearer, while also reducing focus and the effectiveness of sacred flasks by about 7% to my knowledge. And this applies to basically all of the Hornsent masks and helmets. The Erd Tree's blessing quite literally made them sick, and this absolute pure hatred is perfectly personified by the Hornsent NPC. He literally wants every single Erd Tree faithful person dead, and he's not about to stop at Marika's line. I mean, he's like Billy Butcher, you've all got to go. And him being a potentate of Bonnie Village based on his mask makes a lot of sense given his overall demeanor and hatred for Marika and the Erd Tree, which is like the main thing that leads me to believe that the betrayal of Marika had to have predated the making of jars with shaman corpses. But again, I could always be wrong. But anyway, the intense divine resentment of Marika and the tree would manifest itself as the Omen curse, which itself would plague even Marika's own bloodline. Sort of like a final, eternal fuck you from the Hornsent to the Eternal Queen. Sort of poetic, honestly. She's haunted by the very thing she burned. So to be born with the Omen curse was a gruesome fate in the lands between. First off, you had all of these painful ass horns growing out of your elbow, your eye, all different parts of your head or body or leg or knee or behind your knee, just in the worst places imaginable. And you were shunned, of course, usually forced to have your already painful horns painfully removed. Then you were given a weapon that was specifically designed to be taken away from you if you didn't do as told, and were made to fight in a war for the same people that shunned you in the first place for your entire life for something you had absolutely no control over. Curiously enough, the Omens all have white hair, which is not unlike the Lion Guardians, who also have a white mane and Omen horns. This is a trait they both have in common with the ancestral followers, themselves a horned race who worship undying horned beasts. It's almost like there's
So Zionis had asked whether or not the fly people would be related to the Scarlet Rot goddess, or god, outer god, because of the fact that they drop fly mold. Part of the reason why I think it's more Mother of Truth is because when you use the fly mold in crafting, you create the hefty fly pots, which create blood flies, more specifically, and blood flies are related to the Mother of Truth, and the blood flies that get summoned with her stuff. So that's kind of where I draw that connection from, to be honest. But that was a good question to bring up. I forgot why exactly, but I had to do some research on what the mold created.
no way there's not a connection there. Now, as for the white hair, it could simply show that one is connected to their ancestors in a similar fashion to the horns, and it could also be equally viewed as a sign of spirituality due to its connection to the ancestral followers. I mean, hair color seems to be somewhat important when it comes to Elden Ring. It's always highlighted, like for example Radagon's red hair, or Marika's blonde hair, or Godwin's blonde hair, or most recently, Rellana's most luscious black hair. And I guess Omen live pretty stressful lives, so that could be why they have the white hair. One thing of note, though, is that the cursed blades of the Hornsent also possess this hair color, so perhaps it is indeed a sign of spirituality, and it came along with the tangled horns back in the day. White hair does indeed seem to coincide with horns, and both of which are featured on ancestral spirits, so I think that these bull people of the underground civilizations could literally be a shared ancestor of both regular humans and the Hornsent. It's at least a possibility. I mean, should they?
And it still does bother me that if these guys are supposed to be emulating the Hornsent, that the Hornsent weren't crusaded against until after the Liurnian Wars. Like that, it feels like they're just cosplayers. They're posers.
They have ancestor right in their name. Anyway, though, so nowadays in the lands of the Erdtree, the actual Hornsent people are effectively known only as the haunting spirits called elders that plague the nightmares of the cursed omens. And these snickering horned faces would actually be used by an elite order of perfumer warriors called the Omen Killers to mindfuck their prey while also wielding these massive clubs adorned with the severed horns of countless omen. And the Omen Killers, to their credit, imbibed potions that rid them of all their emotions to carry out this rather distasteful work they were charged with. Ultimately, though, they probably just did it so they'd feel less bad about it. Which makes sense. I mean, this duty essentially required them to become demons. And curiously enough, this tendency of having horned nightmares may be something that the Omen inherited from the Hornsent, as they too were said to have been haunted by fell imagery, in this case a fell god, the very same image represented by the furnace visage. It's likely intended to be a representation of the fire god of the giants, since the furnaces also include other fire giant imagery like the two faces on each leg. It's just another layer to the torment of the Hornsent and the Omen. But anyway, much like the Hornsent people of antiquity, many Omen perish at birth due to the horns often killing them, and memento Baron dolls are fashioned in secret to memorialize them. Now, to me, it's interesting that this practice survived Marika's purges of all things Hornsent, but it does say in secret, so I guess some things do fall through the cracks. Now, in the sewers under Landel, the Curseborn Barons are crafted with horns for the royal omens whose names will never be known. These mementos of the fallen omen resonate with spiritual energy and can be used as tools to summon vengeful wraiths, spirits of those who died cursed and were unable to return to the Erdtree. The Tanglehorn Baron of the Hornsent summons slightly brighter wraiths that act as the affinity spell from Dark Souls 3, while the Curseborn ones simply call forth a barrage of golden fiery wraiths that rush to a target. It almost seems as though the horns allowed people to become natural spiritual mediums. The cursed blood of the Omens also seems to be connected to the spirits and wraiths that were unable to return to the Erd Tree, which I guess isn't really that surprising since the Hornsent as a whole were an innately spiritual people just based off of their rituals and beliefs. The Omen Blood's connection to spirits, though, is such that when uplifted it can turn even artificial life into competent spiritual mediums, as seen with the Big Red Albinaurix, who also inherited Mog's black horns after being uplifted by his cursed blood. And this is kind of nuts to me. It's almost like if a robot could conduct a seance and commune with the dead, but it's pretty impressive. And sure, this may be just a testament to the power of the Formless Mother, or any outer god really, increasing the power level of an already powerful cursed blood. It's definitely worth noting here. So anyways though, due to their connection with these wayward spirits and wraiths, some rare omen wind up serving those who live within death due to their own innate connection to the spirits that they possess, and I kind of see it as an example of the omen embracing all of who they are, whether they know it or not. They're kind of like following Mog's example of individualism and not falling into self-loathing like his twin brother Morgott did. And these
I need to listen to that part again. So Zafe asks, are the Omen Killers meant to be a mockery of the Horned Warriors? I originally thought they were supposed to be mockeries of the Omens specifically, because I think that's what the mask says, that they're meant to haunt the Omens the same way that they're haunted by spirits in their sleep, I guess, something along those lines. And so the Horned Warriors themselves, maybe not.
The power level of an already powerful cursed blood, it's definitely worth noting here. So anyways though, due to their connection with these wayward spirits and wraiths, some rare omen wind up serving those who live within death due to their own innate connection to the spirits that they possess, and I kind of see it as an example of the omen embracing all of who they are, whether they know it or not. They're kind of like following Mog's example of individualism and not falling into self-loathing like his twin brother Morgott did. And these Omen then find a new purpose, their own purpose, as priests of death, where they become leaders of flocks filled with other like-minded outcasts that don't hate them for their appearance. I mean, they've mastered their circumstances as opposed to being mastered by them like Morgott was, and they didn't even have to swear any allegiance to a blood god to do it. And yeah, most Omen aren't allowed to find purpose like this, and unfortunately they live out their days as slave soldiers or guarding some unimportant crypt somewhere underground. This treatment was much like what happened to the Lion Guardians, who by all rights should be viewed as godly beasts due to their spot-on resemblance to the divine beasts, but instead are relegated to fighting in pits and serving as guard dogs for dilapidated castles. They're all just unfortunate victims of the Hornsent's retribution against America for trying to erase them from history. I mean, even in the rest of the lands between where their history has effectively been erased, they, or rather the shadow of them, still manages to hold a considerable amount of influence. I mean, the Tangled Horn appearance became a boogeyman to the Erd Tree faithful, and those who had horns were summarily prosecuted in various ways.
It would have been cool to see a horned lion face a horned rune bear.
That's why Omen, Misbegotten, Chain Lions, they're all treated so bad. These cases were viewed as afflictions to be cured, but there was no cure, as it wasn't truly a sickness or an affliction. It just was a normal thing that happened. But these things sort of reminded Marika of her sins and thus made her uncomfortable, so she excluded them from her Golden Order so that they were naturally spurned by the faithful of the Erd Tree, and they lived some pretty pitiful existences because of it. Misbegotten are house elves, the Omen are slave soldiers, and the Lion Guardians probably have it the worst with those painful-looking blade upgrades. Then on the flip side, there's the Beastmen of Fair Missoula, servants of the ancient dragons who seemingly betrayed the Crucibles in favor of the Erd Tree and were rewarded with intelligence in the form of opposable thumbs at the cost of their horns. Anyway, the Hornsent worship beasts.
That's quite a statement there. The Beastmen betrayed Fair Missoula in favor of the Erd Tree and intelligence. At first, my knee-jerk reaction was just kind of to dismiss it entirely, but I guess the fact that Malekith is aligned with Marika and is technically the beast clergyman of Fair Missoula, I should end up giving that theory a bit more time than I would have initially thought. The only thing that really sucks about that is trying to determine when such a shift in allegiance would have happened to work with the Erd Tree, because it's not like we have the Beastmen show up pretty much anywhere on the northern part of the continent. Obviously, we do take the Giant's Forge to get to Fair Missoula, and so maybe they had a connection to the Fire Giants at first, and then that got severed when they joined America. But if that was the case, it'd be nice if we had another sword monument to hint as such, because pretty much the only kind of betrayal we have of the Fire Giants is that of the trolls that we know of. Anyway. Saiwan asks, why would a possibly innocent Omen inherit the sins of the Hornsent? So it could just be a curse in general, because if the Hornsent are suffused with too much spirituality, then that spirituality has to go somewhere, but because they're cursed, they can't go into the Erd Tree. And so maybe if that spirituality just infected children in general, they would go on to become Hornsent instead. For what it's worth, I do think that the Hornsent should predate the Crusade, so then you would need to reconcile whether or not you had Hornsent and Omen commingling at the same time, or maybe not commingling, but coexisting perhaps. Maybe even coexisting might be too strong of a word. Maybe just existing at the same time should be good enough. But anyway. I say, if you like the house elves line, I did that. I did like that too. Ziona says it's not murder if you control what's justified. I mean, it's still murder. As Shakespeare would say, a rose by any other name would still smell as sweet. Two Connoisseur says, we don't see Beastmen in general aligned with the Erd Tree outside of the Shadowbound Beast concept. Yeah. And what's even stranger is the fact that we have Crucible Knights attacking the Beastmen in Fair Missoula, which almost makes it seem like they shouldn't be aligned unless those Crucible Knights are off doing their own thing, which they very well could be, considering the way that Tanith seems to have her own Crucible Knight as a retainer. Hey, Robbie, welcome back in. How's your Dead Souls playthrough going? You got Salt and Sanctuary? That is probably a game that I'll get to in the somewhat near future. You said it's so hard because of the stamina bar? Without Hornsent, Moog and Morga would have to be alive if the Carian kids knew people in the Shadowlands. Presumably, yes. There can be an argument made that Moog and Morga were born after the Carians. There is enough space to allow that reading. I personally don't like it because I get the vibe that Morgot should be older than the Carians if he's kind of the divine right-given ruler of Leyndell after the Shattering transpires. Saiwan asks, how can Marika have a wolf as a half-brother? So, as far as the term half-brother is concerned, the Japanese characters kind of can mean half-brother, but it doesn't mean a brother of consanguinity or like not a blood brother, essentially. So this is a concept that we could potentially tie to something a bit more familiar to people through the games of like Dynasty Warriors or the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The way that Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and is it Zhang Fei, the last one? I'm forgetting the third brother's name. But anyway, they were not related by blood, but they liked each other well enough that they swore to become brothers, and they looked at each other as full-fledged brothers after that moment. And so that kind of similar concept could be at play here. We also have the weird aspect of Blythe saying that he's literally a part of Ronnie, and he's described as a step half brother the same way that Marika is to Malekith, at least in the Japanese. So if Malekith literally is part of Marika, he might not technically be blood related because maybe shadows don't have blood, but it's some fun high fantasy magic for us all. Okay, let's go back in.
That resemble the lions and the misbegotten look like they've been influenced by every damn near crucible possible. All of these things, like I said earlier, Marika didn't like the way these things made her feel, and she decided she'd rather not have to see them. So these things were the pariahs of her society, and what was divine then was now considered a curse. For what it's worth, prior to Marika's betrayal, the Hornsent themselves didn't seem to have much of a problem with non-horned people. It's just...
And yeah, I guess that's another thing to consider about Morgott and Moog and the Omen. When were they imprisoned? We're told that Morgott and Moog were sent under the sewers in the very beginning, which I don't like that description because Godfrey seems to have a somewhat personal relationship with Morgott at the very least. He didn't give a damn about Moog apparently. And so I wonder if that description about them being born underground, it's like, when does Morgott come back? That's what I want to know.
Just a bit like elves and men.
And then, like, when Morgott did come back,
feel like they're close.
And then when Morgott did come back, like, what the hell was the reaction of all the other demigod children?
Prior to Marika's betrayal, the Hornsent themselves didn't seem to have much of a problem with non-horned people. It's just a bit like elves and men in Lord of the Rings. The Hornsent feel like they're closer to divinity than men due to the horns, but they don't appear to have had anything against non-horned humans. I mean, shit, the average Hornsent still refers to themselves as a human, just one with horns. And that's exactly what they are. They're just humans with a slightly deeper connection to the Crucible than the non-horned ones. And you might be thinking, didn't they persecute Marika's people? And I mean, yes, they stuffed Marika's Newmans into the jars because they worked great as divine glue for the Saint Jar initiative that the Hornsent had been cooking up. But I don't think the Hornsent were the ones to subjugate the tribe that became the Blood Fiends, for example. I mean, the use of fire in that description leads me to believe that it had to be a part of Mesmer's crusades. So I think that one's solely on Mesmer. He's the reason a tribe of, I'm assuming, demi-humans turned to the Formless Mother and had themselves uplifted into big ol' ogre-style guys.
So some people definitely believe that the blood fiends are demi-humans because they drop string. I think that's a neat little theory, but because we're told that the blood fiends looked at the corpse of their ancestor, and the depiction on that talisman is that of a headless Hornsent tutelary deity, leads me to believe that the blood fiends themselves are originally Hornsent and they were transformed through the Mother of Truth's grotesque powers.
So yeah, that's like how having horns went from being a divine thing, a sign of spirituality, to a cursed thing, and you're haunted by horned, laughing faces, as well as the ghosts of those who died cursed like you and could not return to the love and grace of the Erd Tree. It's like a whole thing. But I believe that was everything I wanted to get to. I just wanted to do like this definitive video about horns and Hornsent. I know I got a lot of stuff misinterpreted in the last video because I was kind of just going all off of memory and half-read descriptions, but I think this one should be pretty solid. I mean, I think it'll stand the test of time since this Shadow of the Erd Tree is the final DLC to Elden Ring. Hopefully it does as well as the last one. But yeah, as always, I hope you guys found this video to be entertaining, informative, and at least slightly amusing. And if you liked it, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me ramble on about the various topics I find interesting, then please consider subscribing. We just cracked 27K, which again, huge deal for a small channel like me. And I can't get into it enough how grateful I am that to have you guys. You guys are awesome. But yeah, enough of that sentimental nonsense. Let's have our outro and then the final thoughts, shall we? So even after all of that, I'm sure there's shit that I missed and dots that I didn't manage to connect. As always, feel free to let me know in the comments your own theories and opinions, or if I got anything wrong or right. I think the next video is either going to be about Count Ymir or Midra, one or the other. Then I might do another video about the main remembrance bosses and the NPCs as a whole. Got a lot of stuff planned. And as always, I do have that movie stuff coming up. I'm waiting for House of the Dragon to actually start ramping up before I start covering anything.
I should double check stuff like this. Because if a plant is growing out of a heart, it makes me wonder if the two fingers themselves could have had hearts, and if Marika could have killed a two finger to get a quote-unquote Erd Tree seed to grow her own Erd Tree. Anyway, Jameson, nice to see you again. Welcome back to the stream.
Alright. Got a lot of stuff planned. And as always, I do have that movie stuff coming up. I'm waiting for House of the Dragon to actually start ramping up before I start covering anything from it. It's been a pretty slow season. Same with The Boys, kinda. I mean, I've liked the whole Fight Club arc and whatnot, but they still haven't redeemed themselves for that season 3 ending that I thought wasn't very good. But anyway, that's all irrelevant right now anyway. I know I've been saying I'm not going to mention the Aldia video again until it's out. But I just want to
Hey, we will watch that one.
let everybody know that it is still coming. I haven't abandoned it or anything like that. I just really want to cover some of this DLC stuff because it's all really hot on my mind. The Aldia stuff isn't going nowhere, and trust me, it is definitely coming very soon. Sooner than it's ever been. I know I've said this before, but he's like my favorite Dark Souls character. I just want to make sure I get it right. Anyway, though, I'm going to leave you guys with a question. What is your favorite new DLC weapon?
Wait, did we watch this? I feel like I've heard this sooner than it's ever been. Bro, how did I watch? I never removed this from the queue. I'm a Goomba. So this is essentially my second time reacting to this video. That's embarrassing.
Or incantation, or spell. Shit, it can even be like Spirit Ashes or Ash of War. I really like the Poison Flower Blooms Twice. And from what I've told, there's a good amount of things that got nerfed yesterday, but I wouldn't be able to find out because I can't really play the game. My character doesn't load in, and my world only half loads now after that patch. So also, if anybody knows...
It's funny that I remember this part of the video better than the part that came before. I think because it's pretty basic rundown of the Hornsent lore that it feels like anybody else could have done it. But I'm surprised I wasn't tipped off earlier. Huh. Wild. Anyway, Saiwan asks, have I seen the Silent Ellipsis videos yet? So we reacted to one or two... Oh, wait. He was the one with 4 of them. Yes. We actually watched them starting, I think, on Monday and Tuesday. We watched all 4 of those videos. So if you want to go back and check out the VODs on the live section of my channel, you can get my reactions to them there.
They fix for...
So anyway, hey guys, I'm going to share again the Honored Madman Cursed Divinity lore video with you guys if you want to like it, because I am so smart. I've already liked it because I knew this was going to be a banger of a video. That's what it was. And anyway, let's go ahead and jump into the next one then with Erebon's Sellen the Astrologer, History, Fate, and the Mystery in Between, Elden Ring lore video essay.
You start a new game, you're going to...
All right, so this is quiet. Let me bump up the volume. I might need to go and maximize things.
Get this cutscene where a little spark of golden light kind of floats down and lands on your hand. This is what... When you start a new game, you're going to get this cutscene where a little spark of golden light kind of floats down and lands on your hand. This is what animates your dead, tarnished body to come back to life. Now, this little fleck of golden light we could just think of as the soul, or we could use another term called the divine spark, which has some other implications.
I would disagree that this is the soul, because I feel like the soul is supposed to be more celestial related, and there's a lot of overlap between gold and the soul, to be sure, but I don't necessarily want to say that I'm right in thinking that the soul has to be completely divorced from the gold stuff and be celestial related. But one of the biggest reasons why I do think that there has to be some kind of difference between the gold and the soul is the way that we have the soulless demigods, which I reckon still have gold in them, which is why you can continue to make remembrances even though their souls are gone.
In one version of the game, the point is to get this divine spark to escape from the physical world, which is like a prison that it's being held in, and to return to the source once again. And of course, the game tries to prevent this from happening. When Gideon tells us that Marika wants us trapped for all eternity, this could be how we interpret what he says to us before we beat him. In the last video, I interpreted Gideon's words as a little bit different than this. Essentially, he was lying to us, or maybe lying to himself. But I was also projecting my own insecurities and failures onto Gideon, and well, that may have...
Wow, that's pretty strong. So yeah, my interpretation of Gideon is that he is quite often wrong, or he doesn't actually have the full picture of things, and so he can't accept a world where knowledge comes to an end, and if the age comes to an end, he thinks his knowledge is going to come to an end with it, because he's a freaking gidiot. So yeah,
been a mistake, even though it led to somewhere interesting for the narrative that I was going for at the time. But this version, where we're meant to be suffering for all eternity, can be kind of confusing. We kill the last boss and it says, God slain, mission accomplished, end of the suffering, right? But what comes after this point in terms of our ending choices are all just kind of, like for the most part, we're just rebooting Marika again, so we're still stuck here. So maybe our suffering that Gideon was referring to is what happens after we've actually saved Marika. But let's not dwell on these past mistakes. We're going to go somewhere a little bit new today, but also a little bit the same, and that's kind of the theme. There's more than one way to get a divine spark trapped in a prison, it seems. The main thread we're going to be following today is Sorceress Sellen and her primal glintstone, as well as this idea of fate. So I'm not going to do a whole retelling of Sellen's story because I think you already know the story probably. We're just going to do like a short version. So the first time you find Sellen, she's locked away in this basement area, hidden behind this pumpkin head guy, and you just defeat this guy and get in there and speak to her. And so it turns out Sellen's like a wizard training NPC. She wants to train you in some new spells. And she also warns you to be careful who you learn from because, well, there's a lot of fake gurus out there, and she's very nice to tell us this. But it turns out Sellen has a fate, not unlike many of our friendly NPCs that we encounter in this game. And again, like many of the NPCs, her fate turns out to be kind of a bad one if we decide to help her. But we'll come back to this fate idea in a minute or two. Let's talk about the primal glintstone first. Now, what I think has happened here with this primal glintstone is that Sellen has figured out some way to trap her divine spark inside of this rock structure. It's in a small, compact, portable form, but it is trapped inside this thing, and what Sellen will...
And yeah, because of the glintstone seeming affinity with souls or the identity, consciousness, whatever you want to go with, that is also partially why I think there has to be more of a dichotomy between gold and the soul. Although, to be fair, glintstone might be what you get once gold is done mating based on the glintstone firefly, but I don't know, maybe it's more of a silver thing. I wish I knew for sure.
We'll proceed to do is just jam this rock into a corpse of some kind and then reanimate the body in a way kind of similar to how our tarnished body was reanimated at the very beginning of the game. And so, wow, quite a technology she's developed, right? Seemingly infinite life with the only cost of needing to have new bodies once in a while, I guess. Now, it's never explained where these bodies are coming from, but I'd put my money on Celavis or maybe Vare. And we also can't really tell if these people are tarnished or maybe they're coming from the academy. Like, whoever those people are, we're not really sure, but maybe they're the same size as tarnished people.
You can fight Sellen and Deathbite her, so presumably tarnished. But I don't think the game does the best job differentiating between a legitimate tarnished, as in like the Godfrey Marika follower style, and non-tarnished. I think it's just pretty much anything with the same body type as the player is flagged as tarnished for Deathbite or Flame of Frenzy unless they're a boss character.
They seem to wear the same oversized Burger King helms that Sellen wears, so possibly that she's murdering these Karian Academy people and taking their bodies. But this weird, somewhat creepy way that Sellen reanimates these bodies with her primal glintstone is kind of not the only version of this puppetry that we find in this game. There's actually quite a few versions of puppetry going on. So the first, most obvious example of this is Celavis. He uses some kind of nefarious wizard potion to knock someone unconscious and then turn them into a puppet that way. And then from that point, maybe he turns them into a spirit summon, kind of. It seems like that's what happens. Then we've got the example of Shibiri, who takes over the bodies of Yura and Ireda, and I assume just puppets them around as well, getting them to spread the flame of frenzy. Then we've got Radagon being puppeted around in the same way by Marika and the Elden Beast, at least in my version of this story. I know a lot of people won't agree with this, but that's okay. I'm just basing this on the fact that Radagon seems to be like an empty shell, and that the Elden Beast seems to like actually come out of him after we defeat him in the first phase, so it's not too crucial.
And I've had some crazy thoughts about Radagon lately that I wanted to flesh out a bit more, and that was part of the reason why I was freaking out so much the other day when we were watching Phantom Leaves video. So damn it, I don't want to unleash it yet because it's I can't even call it half baked. It's like a quarter baked, a third baked. I don't know, but like there's a lot of this that can make sense, but it just doesn't feel quite right, or perhaps maybe it was abandoned throughout development. So I think I said something the other day, and I might have just left it vague enough to seem like a crap post, but I was kind of being potentially serious in that. What if Radagon is the Skidoo tree or the Shadow tree, or he was, or something like that, or maybe he is the Erd tree? At first it sounds a little bit preposterous, but when you think about it, when you see Marika shatter the Elden Ring and Radagon repair it, he gets cracks on his body which seem to coincide with the cracks on the Erd tree itself. Which it's like, okay, whatever, sure. However, when you look at the Radagon icon, I guess I should probably pull up the icon. Why don't I like ever have these folders ready before I start the stream? That'd be smart. When you pull up the Radagon icon, he does seem to be covered with Miranda flowers almost, and the branches on this also do kind of resemble what I, in the past, called the Crucible statue, which is the one all throughout Langdell and the highway going to Rea Lucaria. Do I have a good close-up here? This one, okay. So it's not perfect, but it is interesting enough that it seems like this might have been more of a thing in earlier development. We literally have no idea what this guy or gal is. It's just kind of there, but it's given like some kind of religious prominence throughout the lands between. So this had to have been a big deal at some point. So it's very strange that we have literally nothing on it other than just that kind of a symbolism or imagery that's shared in common between these things. And why was I bringing this up? Oh yeah, with him being puppeted by the Elden Beast itself and the Elden Ring. So if the Elden Beast is the Elden Ring, and shattering the Elden Ring breaks the Erd Tree, and we do know that the Erd Tree is connected to the Elden Ring, then who is to say that Radagon isn't connected into that process as well? Which is why I'm like, wait a second. Is he a tree person? Were the thorn type appendages impaling all the fire giants on the mountaintops a byproduct of his power because he's a tree boy? Is he kind of like what you would get if Trina was still attached to Mikola? Because Trina is definitely a flower. But I don't know. Zephyr sure would have come up in the DLC because the statues are so prominent in Lane-Del. Oh, do you mean him in general or just like the statue? True Connoisseur says he is vulnerable to fire. Is that the branch sword on that statue? So it does look similar, but it is kind of different. Let's look at a different one of them. Hold on. It very much does resemble a branch sword, but it is not the same. It has like a flower at the top of it. And so I was wondering this, I think it was during Phantom Lee's video when he talked about the beheading of the minor Erdtree guardians, not guardians, damn it, what are the actual terms? The avatars. I was wondering if the Shadow Tree and the Shadow Tree avatar were like the sunflower, and if the minor Erdtree avatars are also ones that had sunflower heads, and if they related to this thing at all. But that just seemed too schizo at the time, so I left it be and only just gave you guys the tip of the iceberg there. So, or that Horns personally prefers to think Radagon was just a dude that Marika thought she could control, unlike Godfrey, who's super sure of who he is. I mean, that is a possibility as well. It just sucks that we have such damn provocative iconography throughout the Lands Between that literally ties to nothing concrete in the game. Am I mispronouncing Skidoo again? It's the Scooby-Doo tree, guys. Zoinks. Halo said the branch sword implies a Deathworth offering, right? No. So the Deathworth offering is one that struggles until the end. So it has to come at like the climax of one's struggle, essentially. Although you might be able to argue that the branch sword can kind of represent that in a like higher order level, but it just seems to be more of a tool than like an actual symbolization of that, perhaps. Maybe I should reread the description, though.
There's many ways to interpret Radagon and Marika's weirdness. Finally, we've got the form of Lunar Princess Rani that we encounter, who is literally just a puppet being controlled by a spirit. So we've got a bunch of different examples that are all hinting towards the same idea, a concept referred to as the ghost in the machine. The main idea is that a person has both a physical component and a spiritual component. In Descartes' philosophy,
I was going to say, right before you brought it up, I appreciate the inclusion of René Descartes in the bottom left of the screen there.
this was called mind-body dualism, and we see similar ideas in numerous religions. And if we try to explain this, it's like the physical component of the person is being puppeted around by the spiritual component. But what this idea can sometimes lead to, and what we see definitely happening in this story, is the idea that the body is really not that important. One example of this from history and religion is something that the story seems to borrow a little bit from, at least, and this is the Gnostic beliefs. We spoke about this a little bit previously.
Oh, it's unfortunate Elden enthusiast went to bed. Get wrecked.
Divine spark idea that we already brought up, that's a Gnostic belief. But when it comes to physical things, the Gnostics really believe that the physical world is kind of all evil. And so this would lead to this devaluing of the body. But it's actually this emphasis on the spiritual to the detriment of the body that I think is going to be the weakness of these wizard characters that we see in Elden Ring. But to recap this divine spark idea again, when the body dies, this divine spark is meant to kind of float away up into space kind of thing. We actually see this in the game with the dissolving tombstones, and also with the Morgoth's spirit escaping into space when he's reunited with Godfrey. So there's a bit of symbolism there, I think. But what happens is, again, that the game tries to prevent...
I appreciate the thought here. I don't know if many people are going to buy it because it looks as though Morgoth kind of fades into a beacon of grace that Godfrey is indicated to go fight the player character Tarnished immediately after.
Prevent this from happening, like something blocks the spirits.
Okay, I was afraid he was going to cut before we saw this. So yeah, like it definitely looks like a ray of light of grace pointing him to us. Although I have wondered whether or not it's the opposite, in that it's essentially supposed to be our grace in a way, pointing us to Godfrey Lou.
From escaping and keeps them trapped in this physical world. So Marika and her Erd tree seem to do this, obviously with the cycling of the spirits that she does with the tarnished and everything. In this interpretation, it seems like Marika is kind of like the Demiurge character in the Gnostic beliefs. Morella does something very similar with her ghost kids. She seems to be doing some kind of like mini Demiurge activities in her classroom. And why this is, I mean, we can't be sure, but she's certainly mentally ill. And we know that Marika / Radagon kind of did this to her, so definitely there's something happening there. And I think we can add a third example here of Sellen trapping that divine spark inside of the rock. So the rock is just a part of a physical world. I mean, it's still consistent with the previous ideas, but this version kind of bleeds into another idea as well. Here I'm talking about the idea known as panpsychism, which essentially states that consciousness is kind of in everything. So often the example is given like of a rock being conscious, like, oh, you don't think a rock is conscious, right? And well, maybe it is.
Is he going to bring up Schopenhauer? I'm going to be really happy if he does.
Maybe it is. And that's basically panpsychism. But a rock containing consciousness, well, this could be our primal glintstone that somehow Sellen has managed to transfer her consciousness into. But what a rock is certainly not is mobile. Let's take a look at our rock-headed old sorcerers, Azur and Lasat, and what they may be telling us. Oh.
So I think one way to map this kind of ideology onto Elden Ring, perhaps a little bit better than panpsychism specifically, would be to look at a treatise like Schopenhauer's Will to Power. So basically, wait, is it titled Will to Power? I'm pretty sure. Let me double check. No, the world is will and representation. I don't know why I thought it was will to power. Anyway, the world as will and representation, it's not the best philosophical treatise out there. It's certainly fascinating in a way. He does bring his own baggage into it, especially like in the last third of the book. But anyway, the TLDR is that there's an inherent will in everything in the universe, and the will is what allows things to act and remain as they are. So, for instance, if you have a pebble, the reason the pebble remains a pebble is because it has the will that keeps it in its pebble form, but it can never become anything greater than the pebble because that's as much will as it has. So if you kind of take that goofy mindset and apply it to Elden Ring, what would happen if you had the will of a person and then you imbued it into a rock? It has the will to become a person again, but it doesn't necessarily have the motor functions to enable it to actually become a person. So then perhaps with the will being a kind of reagent that can keep the soul bound to it, you can therefore move the soul between things like the primal glintstone. But of course, then one big question that should bring up would be, then why put the soul in a rock? Why not in a tree? Well, maybe they did put it in a tree, but more specifically, why like a glintstone as opposed to like another random slab of rock or like a titanite? No, but not titanite, like a smithing stone or something. So, at the very least, the willpower does seem to be tied explicitly to runes, or at least, if not runes, gold in general, based off of how unalloyed gold seems to be compatible with millennia's old will, I guess. But that takes a lot more setting up to explain if you aren't familiar already. Helgo, you never got that far into it. Thank you for the TLDR. You're welcome. Will to Power is Nietzsche. That's what I thought. Nietzsche, I think, was influenced by Schopenhauer. And more than Schopenhauer, what's his name? The other guy. Not Kant, not Camus. I'm drawing a blank on the name. Anyway, so the guy who said God is dead before Nietzsche is who influenced Nietzsche. But Nietzsche got, all the credit because he heard the joke and then told it to everyone else in the class. Kierkegaard? It might have been Kierkegaard. That was Kierkegaard? Okay, yeah. I knew it was like a K sound. Thank you, guys. Oh, you meant Sarta? However you pronounce it. Okay, so why did I go off on that tangent? Anyway, so like the will as world and representation, I think can thematically tie into how the universes of many FromSoft games work, but it's kind of out there and shouldn't really be taken that seriously, I don't think, but I think it's just a neat idea for like a fantasy setting.
Okay, so for Sorcerer Azure, we find this guy up on a mountain for some reason. Like, how did he get here? What is he doing up here? It's not clear. What does appear true is that he's been hitting this rock pretty hard up here, and he's having a lot of difficulty moving around. So he's kind of scrambled his brains up pretty good, and now he's just becoming a rock. And let's just point out the fact that, we're trying to be seeking knowledge here as wizards. Sometimes we go a little too far with the rocks, and, well, it has a negative effect. We got to be careful here, wizards. Now we go back to Sellen and we tell her about this, and she's very impressed. She wants us to do a couple more, jobs for her kind of thing. Now she's going to send us into some weird hidden away cave. So of course we go here and we find another one of these old wizards. This is Lusat now. Lusat, who has disappeared. He's fallen into this cave. He's been hitting the rock again, just absurdly too much rock. Is he dead? Is he alive? We can't really tell, but he is becoming a rock just like the other guy, Azure. So he's just 100% denying his body and just focusing on that mind component, right? Clearly this much wizarding is not healthy. But okay, whatever. We talk to this guy, then we go back to talk to Sellen again, and she's very happy. And now Sellen, she gets a little bit of hubris in her. She thinks that she can kind of take over the academy. Man, I think there's a possibility here that this is a side effect of the rock. She's feeling pretty good about herself in that new body that she stole. Never had to do any exercise at all. Things are looking up for Sellen, and well, now it's time to steal the academy and become the queen, she thinks. Not a good decision, probably because of that rock again. But, well, too late now to change things. This is Sellen's fate, and we've got to help her see through. Or at least if we want to get some rewards. Like, we don't have to help her, but considering we're tarnished and we like to get those shiny rewards, we're probably going to help her.
I do think it's really funny, and it kind of sucks that you pretty much are not materially incentivized to help Jaren at all, and that you pretty much get everything for killing him and nothing for helping.
But now with this idea of fate, we see something else has happened in her questline as well as other questlines that are all kind of connected. We need to kill Radon, which brings the stars back into motion, and this is really the idea of fate transmitted through the game story. With the motion of the stars being held back like Radon was doing, this is delaying fate indefinitely. And when we restore the motion by killing Radon, these fates are put back into motion as well. Now, the Carians, having been descended from astrologers, are also going to be quite interested in the movement of planetary bodies. According to astrologers, your life path and your fate is somehow determined by the location of planetary bodies at the time of your birth. But even though today these astrological influences on a person's fate are not supported by mainstream science, the idea of fate or determinism is certainly not gone anywhere. And one reason for this belief actually comes from studying planetary bodies. According to Einstein's theory of general relativity, our three-dimensional space that we see changing over time is instead viewed as a four-dimensional space-time. One implication of this theory is that this steady flow of time that we experience in our everyday lives is actually relative. From a different frame of reference, time would appear to move faster or slower. And one way this apparent movement of time is affected is by planetary bodies. Massive objects in space create something called a gravitational well. And in these wells, the flow of time would slow down relative to an observer on the outside of the well. If you've seen the movie Interstellar, you'll be aware of an example of this. Some of the scientists go down to a planet that's being devoured by a black hole, so there's a massive gravitational well in this area, and this means that the flow of time for people on this planet is going to be much slower compared to the people who are on the spaceship and not being influenced as much by this gravity. But another way that we could look at this is that the people who go down to the planet whose time gets slowed down, when they return to the spaceship, it's like they've traveled into the future in a way. And so if it's possible...
I also heard like a crazy factoid that makes sense, but is kind of mind-bending in a way, that to reach like the nearest solar system, I guess you wouldn't call it a solar system. I think it was like anyway, it would only take like a couple minutes to go, maybe it's like to the next galaxy if you were going the speed of light from your perspective, but it would take like thousands of years for the return trip. So, pretty much for you, going away from the Earth at the speed of light would seem instantaneous, but coming back would essentially age everybody in relation to you, which is crazy. I don't remember how it went, so I screwed up. All right, Robbie, you have a good night. This is such a Capricorn thing to say, that he's going to go to sleep. Zafe asks, have I ever watched Voices from a Distant Star? Maybe. It doesn't ring a bell, so I'm inclined to say no. I'm pretty bad at remembering names, though. The Space Traveler's Paradox. Yes. Halo says, when people say stuff like, I can't talk to Leos, I'm Scorpio, you just, ugh. So my joke about astrology is that I always tell people that I'm a sign that I'm not, and so they infer things from that, which may or may not be true. And then I tell them that I'm not that sign, and they're like, what? What sign are you? And then I tell them another sign, which is also a lie. And like, that's exactly what that sign would do. And then I don't reveal the secret at that point. Poor Scorpios. Astrology loves to poop on them. I can tell you guys, right? Sure, I'm a Gemini. Godwin is certainly a Cancer. That's his death sign, though. Ha, figures. Moth Crab says, guess your sign. There's already a hint. Moth. So it sounds like you're a rat. Is that the right zodiac? Halo says, that's such a Gemini thing to say. It is, which is why I tell people I'm a Gemini, because they fall for it hook, line, and sinker.
For one person to travel into the future of another person, it's like they've seen their fate in a way, right? But of course, there's no way to know if this fate was really predetermined or if it unfolded, so it's still a mystery. These two competing ideas are known as the block universe and the growing block universe, and we don't know which one is correct.
So Hilko asks, actually, could there be any lore related to that, like being born under a particular outer god / greater one / whatever? So this will come back to my biggest criticism of astrology, and then once I point it out, you guys might realize how kind of silly it is as well. I brought this up on a previous stream a long time ago. I think I was playing a game, so nobody was watching the stream. But anyway, it really sucks for twins to have the exact same personalities because, you know, they're born on the same day under the same stars and everything. So taking that example and applying it further, it really sucks how both Mikola and Melania would therefore be influenced by the outer god of Scarlet Rot. So I think it's a neat idea, but I just don't think it works as far as like the twins and stuff goes. And for me, if astrology is so malleable that an entire person's personality and fate can be altered by a number as few as like a couple seconds or a couple minutes, then what is the point of having any kind of overlap between somebody's fate for a particular day in the cosmological time frame of events here?
But for fun, let's try to apply this to Elden Ring, where we see General Radon stopping the stars from moving in the sky. This perspective is kind of like the guys on the spaceship looking down on the planet. in Interstellar. So they're looking down on the planet. It's like time is basically slowed down to a crawl. And that's kind of what we're looking at, looking up into space in Elden Ring. It's kind of the opposite. So somehow General Radon has reversed gravity. And I guess this is why he can fly around and also whip rocks at us like they're nothing. But the modern day idea of determinism does not only come from relativity. Instead, we think of our grounded human experience and history as being the thing that determines the future. But again, I'm going to say that this astrological influence is still there because we still see this idea of matter in motion when we're looking at our history. In a much more metaphorical way, we still imagine billiard balls, kind of like stars moving through the sky. We calculate all these different variables and we determine where the future is going to be, following some predetermined path that we understand mathematically. And so again, metaphorically, these billiard balls that we consider in our own lives have to do with our history. A few times I've used the
We caught him. He was capturing footage from YouTube. He's got the play button there.
balls that we consider in our own lives have to do with our history. A few times I've used the phrase trauma circumstance metachlorians. Well, these are all billiard balls in a way. And just to unpack these ideas a little bit, when I say metachlorians, I mean genetics. Life experience includes trauma, but also includes all the positive experiences someone would have in their life. And then there's circumstance, which includes all the conditions that someone...
So speaking of the midichlorian thing, the fact that they're kind of reduced to microorganisms in Star Wars makes me wonder if Godric the Grafted would canonically be like the strongest Jedi ever if Elden Ring operated under the same midichlorian rule set there. Just keep grafting parts of bodies with those of higher midichlorian counts after they die onto your body, and you become the turbo Jedi of the universe. So anyway, that Horns is saying that they're pretty sure astrology in Elden Ring is literally just studying the movement of the stars and the planets, which is important when your planet keeps getting hit by living meteor monsters. That's fair, but it really sucks how those moving meteor monsters can just kind of manifest out of nowhere underground in a place like the Yellow Annex Tunnel. And the other thing about that is there did seem to be the fact that fate was unironically tied to the moon and the fate of the night sky. So I do think that although it's easy for us to dunk on astrology in real life, that it probably did have some like metaphysical significance, spiritual significance in Elden Ring that shouldn't be so easily dismissed other than trying to tie it to specific like days of the year or anything like that. Qui-Godric Jinn. Oh no. Godric versus Grievous. Let's go. That's what I was thinking, yeah. Mothcrab, you think people frequently mix up astrology with astronomy? They certainly do. But I don't really blame them when you have biology, so why would astrology be the lesser scientific of the two with astrology and astronomy?
One's born into, over which they have no control. For example, a place in time in history, the religion you're born into, your parents and how much money they make, all these things are factors that are going to influence your life in a million different ways. But one part of circumstance that never ends is our education. You continue learning things your whole life, even though we may not think of it as learning much of the time. And it's actually this process that would allow us to transform ourselves if we were motivated to do so. All of these billiard balls of our past bring us to our present moment, and in our present moment we can affect some change. Education is included here as well as making a decision. These activities take place in our mysterious present moment. And now we've flipped the coin and started talking about free will. When we sometimes cynically, like I have done in the past certainly, when we say there is no free will, we're not saying there's no experience of free will. The experience of free will, at least, is real. But when we say there is no free will, what we're trying to do is take the perspective of four-dimensional space-time or billiard balls. Much like the astrologers, we believe that
I think he's speaking a little bit too broadly here. I'm going to shock you guys, I know, but I don't buy into the notion of free will, mostly because my will seems to be tethered to my earthly body, and that means I don't have the free will as I would like to be able to just, float up and fly around and teleport and do all willy-nilly manner of things that I cannot do because I am bound to the flesh. For as much good as that does me, and much to my chagrin, I would also like to be able to never have to eat again. That'd be quite nice, but here we are. Also, it'd be nice to be able to chase my dog around the yard and not be out of breath afterward. In other words, I need to work out a bit more. Free will can be considered as your separation of yourself from the world in some interpretations. I mean, to me, I think free will is very obviously meant in modern parlance with a more Christian slant on things, whereas I just kind of challenge the foundational notions of that idea in general. Anyway.
Everything is just matter in motion, and there's nothing we can really do to change it. This is a perspective that we get from science. But the real question has always been whether or not our experience of agency is just an experience, or if it is something more than this. And because we can't actually see the future...
So another way to describe his argument is to say whether things are predetermined or malleable to input from the individual, which is kind of what free will is supposed to represent. So if anything, my issue with free will is the framing of the free aspect to it, as opposed to the malleability of determined fate and whatnot. Bro, why can you see the stars here? How have I never noticed this? This is in the mountaintops? There are stars in front of the moon. I guess that's... Oh, no, maybe it's snow. It's snow. This has to be snow, right?
Future, we don't know if our
of course.
Our apparent choices have changed anything. What we actually do is imagine a possible future. We calculate and we assume that the future will resemble the past, and this is essentially what we call science. But it's also very similar to how we think about free will, using this scientific type of thinking.
Halo says, in quantum mechanics, a particle is guided by itself, so there is some free willness. I would just directly challenge you and invite you to say any credible scientist who would ascribe the notion of will into quantum mechanics, other than the whole idea of having an observer change the effects of what they're observing. So if you take the observer away, which is a little bit unfair of a premise here, then could there be will to begin with at all? And if so, would a particle/wave have a will of its own? It seems, at least for our current understanding of the will and whatnot, that's related to consciousness, whereas I don't think anybody would say that a particle/wave has a component of consciousness or will to it. Anyway, I'm going to back this up a little bit.
Thinking. What we actually do is imagine a possible future. We calculate and we assume that the future will resemble the past, and this is essentially what we call science. But it's also very similar to how we think about free will. Using this scientific type of thinking, our predictions usually work out pretty well. And when we do this, we're still being guided by some kind of desire, something that we can't control, like our will to life. Something happens in us, and we make a decision between one of these imagined future possibilities. And then between our deciding and our actions, there's a gap that appears in consciousness where we can change our decision. We can actually act against our natural will, and when we do this, it certainly looks like we have agency. It looks and feels like that, but ultimately we don't know. Whatever the objective reality Bunny Rabbit in itself is doing to influence our decisions is something that we're just unaware of consciously. According to some kind of desire in some imaginary future, we make decisions. So what's the imagined future that we want? What do we desire? And can we make that happen? Also, what path are we already on? Like, what's our likely future if we don't make a change? It seems like on some level we have no choice but to make choices. Even if what we choose is to deny our desires and take no action, this is still a choice. Practically speaking, this apparent free will is all that we know we have for sure. Our observations, our desires, and our imaginings are all kind of illusions that are taking place in our head from a scientific standpoint. But without these so-called illusions, we never would have arrived at a science. So what do we do with that? But maybe the more we understand how much we are influenced and how much we are just billiard balls in motion, we'll be able to make better choices and better understand our own actions before we actually make them. In our present, we can become educated to know the difference between when we believe we're free but we're actually in chains, and when we believe we're in chains but we actually have some freedom. Not exactly new ideas. But to bring this all back together again, I want to go back to this astrology idea where in the past astrologers were kind of like scientists and they thought they could predict the future. But at least today, from the perspective of modern science, we look back on astrologers as people who were overconfident in their answers and were seeing causality where there really wasn't any. And I think it might be a good lesson to take that we shouldn't be so confident when making predictions, because we don't know what we don't know, and sometimes we can be surprised by things that look entirely random or even irrational. But let's get back to what matters. Elden.
It is also very interesting that Mikola seems to want to overcome causality depending on how you look at karma. How do they phrase it? I gotta look this up. Inga. Nope. Inga. All in an effort to bury the original sin, to embrace the whole of it, and be reborn as a new god? Yeah, that is... I know why they did that, but... Okay. So Mikola wants to try to overcome cause and effect, causality itself. Yeah, you wouldn't get that quite so directly from the English.
Ring lore. One character who thought that she had control over her own fate was Sorceress Sellen, likely descended from one of these old astrologers. And after we defeat General Radon and put the fates back into motion, this also kickstarts Sellen's campaign. As we saw previously, Sellen believed that her fate was to take over the Carrion Academy and restore the primeval current. But as we just learned, when people are a little overconfident in their future predictions, things can go wrong sometimes. Sellen's real fate, unbeknownst to her, was overdetermined for failure. She would either be destroyed by Witch Hunter Jaren, or she would be trapped inside of this graven mass for all time, inside of Renala's classroom. Sellen's divine spark is trapped inside of a prison and trapped inside of another prison, with now Renala playing the Demiurge instead of Marika, or Sellen herself. Instead of the original game having to escape from a single prison, Sellen now has to escape from 3 prisons, presumably, and that's going to be pretty difficult. But if we go in the other direction, we can...
I wish she explained the prison thing a little bit more. That felt a little bit out of left field.
Can help Witch Hunter Jaren and just destroy her before this ever happens. Jaren says that he wants to destroy her primal glintstone as well, so this leads me to believe that this primal glintstone was operating kind of like a Horcrux in the Harry Potter wizard school. And so I guess this makes Jaren Harry Potter, and definitely not Slave Knight Gale, because I don't really know that story. But back to this graven mass again, it makes you wonder what the plan is here. Like maybe she'll be turned into some kind of servant for Renala and teleported into the past, maybe? Back to this idea of fate, we actually get to see what's going to happen to Sellen long before it actually happens. The second location we encounter Sellen is in the Witchbane ruins in the south of the Weeping Peninsula. And outside these ruins, we're visited by a graven mass structure, exactly like the one that we later see Sellen trapped inside of. We also find a bunch of marionette soldiers here who are servants of Karya Manor. They are puppets, just like, the other puppets that we already talked about. And so maybe it's possible that this graven mass that we find at the ruins is actually Sellen herself from the future. She's been teleported backwards in time by this wormhole thing somehow. at this exact same location.
No, this one doesn't actually have the Sellen face, I don't believe. If you can show me the Sellen face, I might believe it, but I'm going to strongly disagree.
We encounter Witch Hunter Jaren, who tells us that Sellen's already dead. Now, we of course know that we've just taken her Primal Glintstone out, and that's why she's dead. But we can also just read this as foreshadowing, because we know that she will end up dead. And within a story, this...
I mean, I would appreciate this if the Sellen model of the thing wasn't different. I guess I'll show you guys. So unlike the other graven masses, the one that Sellen operates with has her face in it. So this is definitely her face as opposed to all the other dudes. And yeah. My apprentice.
Foreshadowing ideas, kind of like a message being sent back from the future. And that message in this case is that Sellen is going to fail.
Oh yeah, without horns, you said nice catch. I guess I should also point out that from the player's perspective, you're not likely to see this because it's on top of the damn thing. So let's see where my character model is. So yeah, I am right here and I'm using the free cam. So if you just angled the camera normally, you might be able to catch part of it, but probably not the whole thing. So I really wish that there was a free cam in the game so that way people could enjoy this stuff for themselves.
At least if we follow any of the choices that we're given. But there's one choice that we're not given that we always have as an option, and that is to just do nothing, which we can do. We
Wu Wei wins again.
have the power to do nothing, but it's easy to forget that doing nothing is doing something. We are tarnished, so our billiard balls have been put into motion to try to get these rewards. Getting those things is part of the game that we play. Unless, of course, we become self-aware and override our own programming. We have the power to do this sometimes. Before you go, don't forget to click on buttons if you're so inclined. This would help me out quite a bit. And if you made it this far, I thank you. From the past to your present for some possible future. Okay, well, I might be becoming a rock now. Bye-bye.
I was cosplaying Gold Mask. I was totally muted. Okay. So anyway, I don't remember what I said at the end of the video other than I enjoyed it. I liked it. I was sharing it with you guys. then I was more or less just reading out my comment aloud, which I'll do so now in case you guys are just listening along. So I said, hey, I checked out this video live on stream if you're interested in some of my reactions to it, but I also wanted to comment on the idea of the Witchbane Ruins Graven School Mass foreshadowing Sellen's death. Unfortunately, the mass outside her prison doesn't have the same face on the Graven School Mass that Sellen turns into in Raya Lucaria, so I don't think your idea works as well as I'd like. To be fair, it's kind of difficult to see Sellen's face in her Graven Mask without use of a camera mod. It's on the top of it. Anyway, I enjoyed the video and wanted to let you know, Winky Face. Hey, Mildly, welcome back into the stream. How you doing tonight? Is the cursor the wriggling finger we should interpret? Yeah, the cursor is what made the runes of our faith come into being. Doing nothing means it would eventually be a 1v1 if they could bear to get beyond the standoff of the stare down. Stella says that's how you know it's a real LP stream, when I mute myself. Yep. Hey, Badly, yeah, you're with your lady. Nice. Have a great night. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, so we're actually going to be ending the stream as well. So we didn't get to Zaminical's video today, so we might get into that one tomorrow about how us FromSoft fans lost the plot. Maybe the plot got lost along with the annals that Faram lost in Dark Souls 1. So anyway, I want to thank all of you guys for joining me as always. I appreciate that. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next one at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So until then, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.